Julie, we have a quorum, and it is now 9 o'clock, 9:01, so you can start whenever you're ready.
Welcome everyone to the February 10th, 2022 Landmarks Commission meeting. We're happy to see everyone, even if it is just virtually. Thank you for joining us. 1 second, please. In compliance with notification requirements of Ohio's open meeting law and section 101.021 of the Codified Ordinance of Cleveland, Ohio, 1976, notice of this meeting has been publicly posted. All boards and commissions under the purview of the City Planning Department conducts its meetings according to Robert's Rule of Order. Actions during the meeting will be taken by voice vote. Abstentions from a vote due to the conflict of interest should be stated for the record prior to taking any vote. In order to ensure that everyone participating in the meeting has the opportunity to be heard, we ask that you have your mic on mute, use the raise hand function feature before asking a question or making a comment. The raise hand feature can be found in the participants panel on the desktop and mobile versions and activated by clicking the hand icon. Please wait for the chair or facilitator to recognize you and be sure to select unmute and announce yourself before you speak. When finished speaking, please lower your hand by clicking the raise hand icon again and mute your microphone. We will also be utilizing the chat feature to communicate with participants. The chat feature can be activated by clicking the chat button located at the bottom of the WebEx screen. All meeting activities are being recorded via the WebEx platform. These proceedings are also being live streamed via YouTube. All requests to speak on a particular matter via our website or email have been considered. We also have received emails for those who have provided written comment on a particular matter. We'd like to call the February 10th, 2022 Landmarks Commission meeting to order. Mr. Pettit, please call roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Bonezzi.
Here.
Mr. Kalickia.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Dreyer.
Here.
Mr. Edmond. Director Fields.
Here.
Good morning. Mr. Strickland.
Here.
Mr. Tarasik.
Here.
Ms. Trott.
Here.
We are also joined today by staff members, Carl Brunges, who is our host, our AmeriCorps member, Emily Spasia Schwiff, and Kevin Roberts from the Law Department. One note on today's agenda, item number 3, case 22007 has been removed from the agenda at the request of the applicant. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Excellent. We'll begin with our certificates of appropriateness. We'd like to call our first applicant to present. If you could unmute your mic, announce yourself for our records, and tell us about your project. First applicant is located in the Friesen Schule building, Barcento, located at 1948 West 25th Street, storefront renovation.
This is Maggie Young here from Dimmitt Architects.
And Sam McNulty from the former beer market in Barcento. Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
Madam Chair, Carl, Landmark staff. Staff would like to give a brief presentation prior to the applicants going through theirs, because this will help give a little bit more context to their presentation. We had to do a little bit more deep dive due to the renovations that were being approved.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Please go ahead with the staff presentation first, and then we'll have the applicant's presentation after that.
So this building was originally constructed as a 3-story building and then 2 stories added later. The original storefront looked like this. Not sure of the year of this, maybe the 1950s, but this is how it originally looked. By the 1980s, things had changed in Ohio City, and it looked like things had been boarded up and such. And we were trying to figure out, a question came up during the design review process of what we can and what we can't review at this point. So we had to figure what was original, what was not. So through the years, there have been numerous changes to this facade in the storefront. In 1985, the Cook Coffee Company had a sensitive adding of the gates in the front, but keeping the storefronts as they were. We had to do a little bit of digging through our archives information. And you can see there are some changes here, but it's still into the 1980s maintained the original storefront materials. And here you can see in 1987 where that gate was still in effect, but you can still see that there are original materials on those columns in particular. Later in 1987, the Cook Coffee Company wanted to do some expansion, so they proposed to enclose the front at that point. So since 1987, this has been in an enclosed storefront. And a couple more context from about this time period. So 2001, Market 25 was being opened and they kept the enclosed. You can see where the columns here over on the right-hand side were still out there. And then they kept the interior portions as well. But what we noticed here is, and you can see at the bottom of those display cases, that it appears that all the original material had been removed, all that original marble from all these sections down here. But it did retain some of the original woodwork. But also you can see that the exterior had changed a lot as well. And zoomed it in there that the columns were enclosed. It looks like all the materials had been changed. And then by the time Market 25 opened, it looks similar, but you can tell that the colors have changed on the columns and the bulkheads for the marble. We think it was originally a more green color. A few years later, this was the completed block. And here in 2005, when the Barcento sun was going up, you can see the columns here match the color more closely. And then I will turn this over to the applicants at this point.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate that. It was a cool walk through history there. Yeah, Maggie, I'll let you explain our intent here, but I'll let you take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your time this morning. So what we have here is just some photos to really give context to the current conditions of the building. As you can see, there was, I forget the year, Sam, you'd have to refresh my memory, but there's some operable storefront that was added. You can kind of see those behind the columns, if you will. And really, this is just kind of, again, to reinforce the existing conditions. You can go to the next page, please. So here we did a little bit of kind of up close scrutiny of the existing columns and did determine that it's definitely not a stone type material. It seems to be some kind of maybe like a glass fiber reinforced concrete board or hardy panel or something. And you can see that there is deterioration at the bottom where it's, you know, getting exposed to weather conditions. And that all this is kind of background to kind of give some reasoning for what you'll see on the next page. We are proposing to remove those existing column surrounds and kind of simplify that. So here you can see the overall elevation, just for kind of context with the whole building. We are respecting kind of the Chicago style windows above with in each bay kind of a larger central opening and narrower openings on the sides. We have, through discussions with the local design review committee, established the transom height mullion as pretty close to the what we think is the original, or at least based on some of the existing bulkheads within the space that'll align nicely with that head height that we're proposing. And we're also maintaining kind of a solid base across the entire storefront. Important thing to note of this proposal is that that central bay, you can kind of see a dashed X there. And maybe actually if you go to the next page where we zoom in on this a little bit, yeah. So that central bay is actually an operable storefront door. So that is a panel. We have a section coming up, but I'll just kind of describe it for now. It's one solid panel that pivots in the middle and raises up. So it doesn't have any kind of hinged parts, and that allows us to really keep very consistent mullion lines with the fixed storefront on the outer two bays. At the columns, we are proposing to just do a very minimal metal wrap at those to really help create a consistency across the facade. What else? We are keeping the location of the previous fixed storefront on the outer bays. That maintains the same location in the proposed. The central bay will be stepped back a little bit to accommodate some of the mechanics of that operating door. And it also, we think, helps to reinforce a little bit the history of the space, which did have that, the center bay was originally not an enclosed storefront. It was just open to that kind of entry vestibule showcase type area. We are proposing new lighting on the two columns and the outer piers, which would be just a simple kind of downwash fixture. If you want to go to the next page, we have some more details. Oh, this is kind of just a demolition plan for reference of the existing conditions, if any questions come up on that. Next page, please. And the ceiling conditions as well. That historic plaster ceiling is staying intact in the planned renovations. Next page. So here's the section which I think is really helpful for understanding how that door raises. There's a couple pictures over there to the right of installations of this type of door. It's a counterweighted system, which is kind of an interesting historical type technology. And so again, it does pivot in the middle, raises all the way up to the head height of the opening. And it will align kind of nicely with the proposed canvas awning that we have there too, you can see above. There's some images of our exterior lighting fixtures. The storefront material is to be black, as will be the door framing material. And the canvas awning will be kind of a light gray color, in keeping with the terracotta facade and just kind of an overall lightening and brightening concept for the facade. I think that's about the overview. If anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to address them.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll begin with feedback from the local committee.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Nate Law, Ohio City Incorporated. So this was seen last week at our meeting, and it was approved as presented. There were just a few comments that they had. So the members were interested in seeing a reuse plan for any of the removed or demolished materials as part of this project. They appreciated the window system not being noticeably able to move, even though it does have that flexibility. They appreciated that it was keeping intact with the historic district. And the only comment or suggestion they had was they'd like to see slightly thicker muntins on the window sashes. So it was approved as presented. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. We'll move on to opening the floor for the commission. Questions and comments from the commission? Who would like to start us off? No questions or comments from the commission? Mr. Strickland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wondered if the architect and the owner had pursued consideration of recreating those column surrounds that were part of the historic facade, and if the opening width of that overhead door is consistent with meeting those original column widths, and if there was a possibility of kind of recreating those surrounds and still accommodating this new overhead door feature.
Yeah, we definitely looked at that. we were of the opinion that kind of this a little more a little cleaner look was still respectful of the historic nature of the building itself, but allowed us to have more transparency with the storefront.
Yeah, and to your point about the operation of the overhead door, with the historic columns had a wider capital and base, as you kind of could see in the photos. And so that creates a little bit of complication in the detail of connecting the overhead door framing to that. And so in an effort to clean that up, that was another kind of consideration of removing that more intricate column details and simplifying it makes all those details cleaner.
Okay, I understand that, but obviously that was a primary element of the historic storefront, and some, effort to acknowledge that and respect that, I think would be preferable. But I understand the logistics of trying to accommodate the overhead door and the difficulty that the capital and base would have presented in that. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At least initially, I'm going to also discuss those columns. I was reviewing the materials that were sent over, and I was looking at the historic photos. I tried to also go online and look for more historic photos. And when you look at the building, the entire building, the columns, they maintain that vertical feel between the bays. The terracotta lines up, with the pretty much with the width of the columns, and it just grounds that building so nicely to the lower level. So I think those columns are integral to the building and integral to the historic character of the building, and I do not see them. I cannot see them being removed. So that's my initial comment is that I think the columns need to stay and be integrated into this design.
Thank you for that feedback, Ms. Anderson. Mr. Renesi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As always, Carl, thank you for the detailed reports on history. I love these presentations, and I'm going to expand upon what everyone has said so far, which is I think what was really interesting urbanistically about this building before is that, which has slowly eroded over time, but is that you felt that the facade basically came down, and whereas traditionally it would hit the ground, it wraps under, and you get like this beautiful ceiling condition. And so you're starting to blend the outside to the inside because of the way that the street just kind of became a part of the first floor of this building, which was then anchored by these columns as kind of the entryway. And then, as we move through time in the 80s and the 90s, right, we've slowly crept those systems up and up and up and up to meet to the front edge of this building. But yeah, as we've done that, though, admittedly losing the intentions, I think, of what the original building wanted to be, we've always maintained at least the idea of these independent column objects, right? And the front plane of the building is wrapping in and around them to still give a hint to that idea of the street edge blending into the building. But what happens here, now that we've completely eroded the distinction between column and front surface plane of the building, is now we've basically lost that intention. Basically remove the original intention of what this first floor was going for urbanistically. So I have to agree that there has to be some maintaining a distinction between the object that is the column and the plane surface that is the storefront. So it feels like it wraps behind, at least in my opinion, to maintain at least the original intention of kind of what was happening in the historic building. How to achieve that with your current design, though, I understand the need and the desire to kind of enclose the space, for all sorts of logical reasons that we don't need to bring to light. But I think the happy in between might be is, if I'm looking at your plan detail correctly, is that this, I know that the storefront system is attaching itself to the current column. I don't know if you could think of a way of, like, you know, an interdependency. I know it's redundant, but an interdependent structural way of kind of separating it away from there, so you still can basically wrap behind them. That would be my first inclination, to kind of bring that back in the design. But I do love the look of it, right? It's very clean, it lines up, it's Chicago style, the proportions are there. But I think it's the columns for me. So that is all I have for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Bernazzi, are you stating that in trying to provide more recognition of the columns by like pushing the storefront on the north and south side back so that you could read the columns? Is that what you're saying, to provide some space and breadth between the column and the storefront?
I've always wanted to try this. I don't know if Carl will approve it or not.
I don't think I can.
Oh, sad.
I know what you want to do. I see your request, but
I know. I've always wanted to be able to like draw so I can, you know, architects, you want to draw to explain your ideas. Yes. Yeah. I would say that's okay. I know I was declined. It's okay. But yes, Madam Chair, that's kind of what I was trying to get at. So it's sometimes hard. You wish you could annotate stuff, but never mind.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Bernazzi. I just was trying to make sure we're giving clear feedback. Mr. Edmond?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for arriving a couple minutes late. And I think at this point, I'm sort of being redundant to the comments that have already been said, except that I'll add a little bit. I don't think the capital and the base of the column being dimensional elements are necessarily as important to the tectonics that we're talking about, at least from my perspective. However, I think with increasing the width so that the proportion is more like the historic proportion and relates better to the columns above and has that sort of masonry proportion. Also, I think you could do a lot with the color of the columns. So the dark mullions, I think, make the storefront visually recede. Having a lighter color at the two columns would help that have a little prominence. I also like the idea of bringing the side bays back a little bit, so it enhances that that sense that the part that goes in is the part that leads you into the building, and the facade maintains that that tectonic character.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond. Giancarlo?
Yes, good morning, thank you. Yes, could I actually see this rendering here? You know, I went through several storefront programs on Carnegie and Tremont, and we had to make every effort possible to recreate a storefront similar to the historical storefronts, and I'm not seeing such an effort here. One of the things I think are the mullions and the frames for the windows should be larger and more in line with the framing and mullions above. And then, I mean, could I see a rendering of one of the historical storefront? Do we have a photograph of that? I thought I saw it. I mean, I'm very familiar with this building, obviously, because it's been a landmark building for a long time. So yeah, so I think I'd like to see something larger and more historical as far as the framing is concerned. It doesn't really seem to relate, at least to me, to the entire facade of the building. Has that been considered or thought about?
Yes, I mean, I think a lot of the challenge of this building is that, so there wasn't a facade here historically, right? For the image that we're looking at now. And so there's that little bit of storefront on the kind of extreme outer edges that you can see now. That was actually a display case at the original time. You can see it's actually a very minimalistic vertical framing elements, almost frameless really. There's the horizontal at the transom level, but other than that, it's pretty minimal. And so I think the approach that we took, rather than creating a historic looking storefront, was to try and create something with a lot of openness and to try and respect the history of the building in that manner, of that this was a transparency. I think to Mr. Benezzi's point about kind of the beauty of the facade wrapping down and in, when we are now able to open that center bay with that large operable door, hopefully we'll pick up a lot of that historical move, which I think is a benefit to what we're proposing to do. I think regarding the conversations about moving those the outer bays kind of in to respect the columns more, there are some challenges to that, which would be, you can see where the historic storefront line was originally on those outer edges and where that bulkhead at the bottom is. And we are kind of trying to maintain that and continue it over to the column. And then, you know, showing more of the depth and scale of those columns at the middle bay. I understand that you're not seeing that on the edges. But it just starts to be really hard. I think there's a bit of steppiness to the existing storefront that we were trying to address and maybe create a more unified elevation overall. And maybe the plan view that has it in red, I think might show kind of how steppy it is currently, and maybe help understand what we would have to do to express those columns. Yeah. I don't know if it's possible to zoom in on the front at all, but you can kind of see right where the step back is currently. And we just wouldn't be able to have the same kind of reference to the Chicago style in those outer bays if we were to step it back. We would have to come up with some other elevation design for those outer edges, which would be maybe something more akin to what's there now.
You know, we did, this is Gary O'Groggy from Dimmitt. And we did do a lot of different studies and versions of this. And one of the challenges is also that opening door is central to the whole scheme. You can kind of see how the central bar lines up, and I think the whole reason why they're doing the renovation is to open up the storefront. And with that sort of flip up door, there's limited to get, if you got like really thicker mullions, I don't think you can get those on that type of door. So that was another challenge.
Well, I'm not even quite sure why that door is in any way historical, really. I mean, we're creating a new facade for this structure that's, to me, quite unrelated to any historical precedences, I think. So I probably would not vote in favor of this.
Thank you, Giancarlo. I'm going to enter my comments now that we can come back to the conversation.
I've done a lot of projects where I absolutely
love
right. Makes so much sense.
On
this, but we'll
Carl,
take
can
it.
you, Mr. Okay, thank you. I guess my comments would be similar to what has been said to date, is that how flat this, one thing, the beauty of this building is that it has a very articulated facade versus the very flat ones in other areas. And I think you're losing that for the current design. I only wonder if you beefed up the columns some and did provide some articulation similar to what is there now, to respect what's there, in width and maybe even in dimension, and that it is that, I think, octagonal column, I believe. Could it give you that ability, and then stepping similar to what is there existing, could you step back to both sides of the facade to, like it does currently, to recess your door back to maintain and respect the existing bulkhead at the street, on the north and west side where they exist, but then step it back to those doors that you're looking to provide in both of those locations, and give you that ability to respect what was there, but provide it in a new way, to provide it in the reframing of the entrance into the building. To me, right now, it's really flat and it doesn't express the character, but if the columns were beefed up and or changed from just a standard rectangular to, I think, let's say octagonal, because I believe it was, and stopped at least the door areas of the facades back like it does currently, it feels like it'd be in line with what has been there for 40 years. I believe you said this was renovated in the 80s. So that would be my feedback on it. The size of the columns, the size of the mullions. Since this was a delicate storefront, installation originally and currently, the width of the mullions aren't a deal breaker for me, but how it engages those central columns and its expression. It's the loss of the expression across the front elevation are the things that are sort of holding me back on this design. Ms. Anderson, you had some additional questions or comments?
Yes, very briefly, I just want to say that I'm in agreement with you and with Giancarlo. I recall back in whatever it was, 2001, when this was originally renovated, and there were little storefront, little businesses in there, different eateries and people selling different goods. I frequently went to shop there and eat there, and the articulation between the entrance the open entrance of the space and the sidewalk was very nice. It had a really nice feel to it when you walked in with the ceiling and I don't know, that articulation and step back is something that I think can really enhance the overall building and enhance the public's experience with that building. So I would like to see that accommodated somehow. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Other questions or comments from the commission? Other questions or comments from the commission? Or would someone like to put forward a motion? Mr. Strickland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Based on my comments and those of my fellow commissioners, I think if this went to a vote, that it would probably not be successful. So at this time, I would suggest that we approach the owner about tabling this application for a certificate of appropriateness and give them an opportunity to address our comments and come back with an alternate design.
Yeah, I appreciate all the these are all great points that we'll have to study a little more and work on the plan. So we'll table it and come back and try to address all the concerns that were shared today.
Thank you. We appreciate that and your approval to table this because we do think this is a great opportunity to really, bring the storefronts and the business some new life and really allow people to really enjoy this building because it is a beautiful building. So with your approval, then would someone like to make a motion to table this project?
I'll move to table.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a dual second by Ms. Anderson and Giancarlo. Any further discussion? Right. Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Thanks everybody for your time.
We're going to just do the official to vote it, but thank you.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Colicchia,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmond,
Yes.
Director Fields,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasik,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion to table passes unanimously.
Like we said, this is an exciting project. We look forward to seeing how you can finesse this and bring us back because it's an exciting building and location, and your business is appreciated in the area.
Thanks for all the thoughtful comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next applicant, located at 1714 Randall Road, new addition.
Madam Chair, I would just like to remind the commission that we saw a project at this address in 2019. It was tabled for further study. The commission had some issues with the way in which the addition was addressing the historic house. There is now a new ownership and a new architect, so we're revisiting a new plan here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. That's helpful. Would the applicant like, you're welcome to unmute your mic, announce yourself, and tell us about your project.
Morning, everyone. This is Paul Began. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I've been having some problems with my laptop's microphone lately. Steve Mott is also here as well, who is the new owner. Mr. Ott lives across the street from this particular property. And I think we'll probably be back before you on a few additional projects shortly as well too. Mr. Mott is investing in the heavily. I think he's going to be a great asset. This particular house, is really a modest house. The entire house is 1,200 square feet upstairs and downstairs. It's workforce housing in this neighborhood, which is a little bit juxtaposed across the street are some probably the finest of the high Victorian houses in this particular part of the neighborhood. I think what makes this location exciting is this triangle lot, right? We have this wonderful lot attached to this house. So really what we're looking to do is take this house and make it a little bit updated so that it maybe earns a little bit of the respect that this lot provides for it, being at this prominent corner, but also trying to same time balance that feel of keeping it of a more modest workforce house. So it's trying to maintain that balance. So the addition is really twofold. One, there is no garage on this lot, and having some site parking on here would be very beneficial. And then number two is really the upstairs, and it's hard to tell from this picture right here, is kind of a space in the gable, right? So if you can see the top of the windows, where they align to where the roof comes down, the top of the windows are at about 6'8". So you can kind of see it's kind of just a room in a gable space there. So there's not really a great layout for bedrooms. So the addition also on the second floor would have an additional bedroom and bathroom. So to kind of, make this house a little bit more livable what it is, and utility of adding some parking. Before we move on to the next couple slides here, I'll have you note on the site plan. So there already is an existing curb cut. And I think cars just park in front of this house right now, or have over the past number of years. So this is really formalizing that a little bit and actually taking and doing some pavers where it's just concrete now to go up to where the stoop would be. So kind of delineating the difference between what is car area and what is pedestrian area. And then on the back side of the house, there currently is a little patio right now, but it is kind of more formalizing that space a little bit so that there is some outside space available for the people that are going to be living in this house. Little tiny side note, it is a odd triangle, and Mr. Mott is working an easement with the adjacent neighbor to actually cede some of that property over for the use for the adjacent property as well too, to help regularize that house's lot as well too. So we can go on to the next slide. Here's just some pictures of the existing house. Again, it's very, very modest in nature. I think other than the location, probably people would not pay much attention to it. Let's go on to the next one. Again, just some floor plans so you can understand what we're trying to do with the addition. Again, the whole house upstairs and downstairs is 1,200 square feet. I think the downstairs is less than 700 square feet. So you get an idea of the size of this. Really, the addition on the ground floor is to put a covered parking area, and then on the second floor is to be able to add a bedroom to this house. Okay, we can go on to the next one. Thank you. So you can take a look at what the addition does in elevation right here. Again, having that carport, still maintaining that entry stoop into the house, and then adding addition on the second floor and tying those two pieces together. We can go on to the next one. So we have just a kind of a rendering of what that might look like and the materials. I think that's it, unless Mr. Mott has anything that he would like to add to this. I will let you know that when we were at Ohio City, they were supportive of this project, noting that once we get the final landscaping put together, we're going to come back. And the reason for that is we don't want to just submit the landscaping for this house. Obviously, the property with the corner lot is much bigger. And Mr. Mott is working with some neighbors, kind of voluntarily allow that to be a little bit more public access and a more thoughtful landscape design. He's working through with some neighbors right now. So the landscape piece is going to come back only because I think it deserves a little bit more attention because of the nature of the lot.
Yeah, I'm the owner, Steve Mott. Can everybody see and hear me?
We can hear you, yes?
Okay, good. So the only thing I would add to that is where the triangle is particularly attractive property. Up until we bought the house, we didn't know if anybody owned the property or not. A number of people used it as a dog station. We thought we might formalize a dog station at the tip of the triangle with doggy bags and something for a water dish and a receptacle for the poops and the poop bags. We've got, like Paul says, several neighbors who want to contribute. Two of whom are across the street are in both professional personal landscapers who are going to help us with trying to address that. It's just grass right now, covered by a lot of trees. We'd like to remove one tree next to where we plan to do the addition, but trim the others up and make it really an entryway for people coming into Ohio City on the 44th Street. Coming off the lake piece. There's a fair amount of traffic both directions, and so an attractive lot there and the attractive house, I think, would benefit everybody in the Ohio City area.
Thank you for the additional feedback on the new proposal. That's very helpful. Thank you. So, does that conclude your presentation? Okay. We'll begin with feedback from the Local Design Review Committee.
Good morning again, Madam Chair, members of the board. Nate Law, Ohio City Incorporated. We saw this project, looks like a few months ago now in December last year, and it was approved with the condition that they simplify the standing seam roof over the porch and possibly extend the balcony to be the full part of the top. And that they did do that according to this presentation. So that was the only condition on the approval, and they met it. So we're happy about that. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. We'll move on and open the floor for the commission for questions and comments. Who would like to start us off? Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was reviewing some of the photos from when the property was listed last year. Just looking at the photos in the MLS, and you know, I have to concur with the applicant that there is not a lot of room, a lot of headroom in that second story bedroom area. So I think this is a nice, elegant solution to that. I really like the design. I really like the proposal. I'm fully supportive of what this applicant is trying to do. You know, the house is, you know, it was probably renovated 30 years ago at a time when, you know, nobody had the funds to, you know, invest a lot of money into these homes. So it does need to be completely revamped, and it sounds like this applicant wants to do justice to this property. So I look forward to seeing this.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Mr. Tarasik.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I recall correctly, I do remember the last time this piece of property was before this commission, and it is a very unique and attractive location, and that lot's a very unique and attractive lot. And again, if I recall correctly, that we had a number of discussions about a number of issues with, I believe, an addition and with the parking and everything, and access to the property with it. This is so much better than I think the last one we had looked at, and I think it's a very attractive solution to what they want to do. And I look forward to. I'm very supportive of it, and I look forward to see what the thoughts are on using the remainder of the property on that lot that comes to a point. I think that's a real opportunity there for that neighborhood. So I'm in support of this project.
Thank you, Mr. Tarasik. Other questions or comments? I'll insert my comments right now while we're waiting to see if there's others. I agree with what has been said. I think you've taken the comments that we made on the previous application and actually incorporated into your new design. It's a very thoughtful, respectful addition. And my only comment would be related to your fencing and using a standard privacy fence. I would encourage you, I don't think it's a deal breaker, but I would at least stain or darken it so that it aligns with your accent, color use on your doors, or look at something a little bit more unique to align with your design. Right now that, in the natural wood state, even a white fence would be better, something to align with, the design more than just a standard, wood privacy fence.
Fair enough.
Or a product of what we had in our cache of 3D rendering things to put in. The fence is really integral with what's going to happen with the land as well, too, right? So whether there's some trees or some bushes, it's going to be kind of respecting what's going to be happening more with the yard than it is with the house. So I agree 100%.
Well, we would We can also just make a contingent to return with landscape so that we can see that, at a future date. But overall, I think the design is very respectful to the original house, and I'm in support of it. Other questions or comments from the commission? Or would someone like to put forward a motion?
I move that we approve it as presented.
All right, we have a motion. Do you have any conditions? Or I would recommend we add the condition to return for the landscaping and final fence material.
Okay, include those, please.
All right, so we have a motion with one condition, or the condition to return with those 2 items. Do we have a second?
Madam Chair, I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Rossett. We have a second. Any further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Colicchio,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund,
Yes.
Director Fields,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasic,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Very exciting project.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You will.
Move on to our final applicant under certificates of appropriateness located at 5817 Detroit Avenue, the Renovation. I'd like to welcome the applicant to open your mic, announce yourself, and tell us about your project.
I'm sorry. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Demchik. I'm one of the owners of this property, and with me is Mike Rose, our architect for the project.
Welcome.
Thank you,
everybody. My name is Mike Rose. I'm the architect for 5817 Detroit Avenue. And I would like to start off by first and foremost thanking the committee for this opportunity and letting them know that I am first and foremost as an architect working in historical districts over the years in different cities. I always try to value first and foremost the integrity of what historical society means and what the value of the history of properties. That being said, I also like to incorporate some things today that give a more modern look without taking away from the integrity of the historical district. And I believe this property, which has sat vacant now for 5 years, obviously needed not only a facelift, but a new look to bring value to this area. I mean, this is obviously a very main street. This is not a side street. And I understand the value of the integrity of maintaining that. That being said, prior to doing this design, I spent some time looking at the neighborhood, assessing some of the other properties in the area and saying that I see some of the things that work in this area and hope that I could incorporate them in this design. That being said, I'd like for Carl to kind of show you some of the slides of what we plan on doing here, and look forward to working with you. So as you can see here, you see the existing property with the adjacent properties next to them. We have maintained the same perimeter square footage of the property. There are no new additions aside from the east elevation. And as we scroll through these, you'll see some of the, there you go. There's an image of the existing property as is. And like I said, it's in a very dilapidated state right now. It's sat vacant for a lot of years. There's a good image right there. It shows you what it's been like. I believe at one point in time, obviously there was probably some type of maybe retail space below. I'm not really sure. But
it was years ago. It was a restaurant, I guess, and they had that on 40 years ago, from what I understand.
So that's the property as it currently sits. And as you'll see as we scroll through this, you'll see the new ideas we have. This is going to be a 2-unit property, upstairs, downstairs, and we're just trying to add, you know, aesthetic integrity to the neighborhood and bring value. So this is what I would like to start with. So this was our original submission. We met with the commissioner, the design board a couple times prior, and this was some of the original ideas we had, and you're about to see how we've kind of changed the design concept. A lot of the concerns that the committee had prior to this was the front elevation and what's going on and what we had hoped we could do, and kind of where we hopefully met in the middle to not only appease the historical district, but also represent what my client is trying to accomplish. This was the first image. Here's your second image. And I think Carl will show you the third one. This was, okay, there's some elevations. Basically what happens, we decided that gable didn't work, extending it all the way out in the front, pulled that back, and we added and incorporated back into the front elevation some of the existing historical elements, such as the corbels on the gable.
Mike, if I can interrupt real quick.
Yep.
What we're trying to do in that front porch is there's a view of downtown Cleveland, and we thought of trying to make it like a 2 or 3 season front porch. You can relax, watch the CVS marathon run by in the summer, that type of thing. So that was our intent, and that's why we were going to have the front porch covered like that with the extended gable. So
here's our current. Right, no, that's fine. Thanks, Mark. This is our current rendering of what the committee prior to this accepted and agreed that this kind of met the requirements of what they were looking for.
Would you like to tell us about the materiality of the project?
I'm sorry, the
materiality, what materials you're proposing and so forth?
Okay, so here you can see we're getting to that point. Basically, with especially a lot of concern was the front elevation, especially with the second story deck. So we would be using a EFCO aluminum railing system with a horizontal stainless steel baluster system. There you go. The windows are vinyl clad, and the siding is a hardy board vertical siding.
What colors are you proposing?
Well, if you go back to the one of the renderings, and again, there is a property catty corner from us that we kind of tried to mimic because we liked the way it looked. The existing brick obviously would be resurfaced and painted it black, and the vertical siding would be white, and then the remaining windows and doors in a black finish.
Yeah, I become friends with Casey across the street. He has the, like Michael said, we pretty much duplicating what he has. So it's just so nice. It keeps the integrity of the historical side of it, and also we try and make your life easier for a judgment in our favor, because it has helped us out to our expediency of design.
Yeah, and we assume that obviously the property catty cornered obviously had been approved by your committee, so therefore we would kind of try and stay in line with that, and it worked with what we were trying to do.
Thank you for the presentation. If there's nothing further, we'll move on to feedback from the local design review committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This was seen twice by the Gordon Square Design Review Committee. When first mentioned, the motion was to table the project pending study moving the front deck and railing back. There were some concerns that being too close to some of the wires that were out in the front, somebody could actually reach out and touch them. and to making the opening of the second floor deck entrance to more closely align with the existing opening, studying the roof projection, study and refine the north-facing window in the storefront, submit measured drawings, give 2 perspectives along sidewalk, and more details on all the material types and colors. If in the second meeting, the committee was happy with the changes from the first, there was some disagreement to the use of the modern railing system, with one member feeling it was inappropriate, but the rest of the committee felt they understood his position on that, but the majority felt it was an okay balance. The motion was to approve the plans, but to return the bracket and the fascia details to the front. You can see here that these were the original details, and that was passed 4-1. Northwest neighborhoods had no objection to the design. This is within their special improvement district, and they are going to be working with traffic and engineering to remove the ADA parking signs in front. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. We'll open the floor to the commission for questions and comments. Mr. Edmund, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One question initially. In the architectural elevations, it appears that there's like a circular attic vent or something in the front facade that does not appear in the renderings. Is that part of the design?
Sorry, say again.
In the architectural elevation of the north facade there, yeah, it looks like an attic vent or something.
Yeah, and I apologize for that. I should have put that in the rendering, and that was more of just a detail than anything else.
Is that actually an attic vent, or is it just a visual detail?
It was just a detail in the drawing.
I would say from the previous version to this one, I think the moving the roof back and the brackets are both really good gestures, and I think the scale of the door also is more appropriate.
Yeah, and that's what we tried to do. One of the concerns was trying to maintain the again within historical elements, reducing the size of that door, and we did that.
I also personally have no problem with the railing. I think that the lightness of it is a nice gesture, and I think it works pretty well. The one thing that I do want to ask about is the painting of the brick black. It's a little hard to tell from, and I'm on Google Street View here. Is the brick currently painted red, or is it just a very red brick?
Yeah, it's the old dead.
I'm sorry.
It's just a red brick.
It's just a red brick.
So I'm so sorry to interrupt you. If you Google across the street,
I see the one, so like you said, sort of catacornered across the street.
Right.
I'd ask you to consider unless and it doesn't look like it's too deteriorated, but unless there's really some strong need to, I would discourage you from painting the brick, partly because it's something that's very hard to undo. And also there are sometimes just performance issues with brick when it's painted because the brick can't breathe. But aesthetically, I think the black would be a little severe. And I know that I see a lot of sort of dark grays and blacks and things in kind of contemporary architecture. But I think in this case, I would really discourage you from painting that brick black.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, Ms. Anderson, you can go, and then I will insert mine. Go ahead. Ms. Anderson?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I drive by this building frequently, and every time I go by it, I'm a little frustrated. I envision a very nice vernacular Victorian home under that T111 siding, and I always was hoping somebody would come along and remove it and restore it, and try to enhance the look of this property, because I think it has basically some very nice features. And currently there's those two narrow windows on the second floor in the front. And part of it is blocked off because they lowered the window. And, you know, I often wonder if there's, you know, some nice detail behind that T111 that, you know, would have been casing that window. But anyway, I guess that's not happening here. I don't like the vertical siding. Again, I think it just riffs on the T111 that was there. I don't have a problem with the railing because the railing is pretty delicate, but I'm in agreement in that I don't think that that brick should be painted black. You know, I don't reference the building across the street as a guide to how this should be renovated. I tried to look for historic photos. I couldn't find any, but I think it's because I'm not that good at looking for those kind of photos. I don't know if the applicant has tried to find any historic photos or if they've uncovered anything. I'm curious about that. But those are my comments, and that's my question.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Mr. Strickland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. From the existing photos, it looks like the existing structure has typical 4-inch gutters and downspouts in the white. I don't see anything rendered in terms of downspouts. You've got a black fascia and a white siding on the outside. And I want to know how you're going to handle that drainage and make a transition from the black to the white. And at the flat deck, how will that be treated and in terms of roof material underneath that decking material, and then drainage off of that deck?
Yeah, I'm Michael again. So yeah, and again with the renderings, I wasn't really concerned about. I didn't feel it necessary as architect to show you where the downspouts would be. I mean, obviously that will be taken care of. I mean, the new roofing structure is completed. I mean, that's obviously that has to be done. We would, and I don't believe in this type of environment that we would go with it. Maybe a white guttering system. As far as the front decking, it's being sloped appropriately, and drainage would be supplied on the, I would say it would be the west elevation, northwest elevation. So yeah, I mean, it's all been taken into consideration. I didn't, for rendering purposes, think that gutters needed to be added to that. I was trying again more to show the aesthetic look of it and the conceptual design more than details such as that, which are more of a construction concern.
Yeah, I think gutters add to the aesthetic. And my question was, are you intending to have white gutters or black gutters, and how do you make that transition? As far as the deck goes, are you saying that the roofing and the decking material are synonymous and that it just sheds off of that deck?
If you look at the current picture of it, there's already that roofing is already existing, and if you see there is gutter, there you go, right there. If you see the guttering going around, we would maintain the same image there.
It's hard to pick up. So that looks like a fairly low slope roof to me, as opposed to a deck.
I think what Mr. Strickland is alluding to is, are you going to do a tear off of that roof and rebuild it, or are you building on top of it to maintain or to create a flattened area? Because those aren't quite reading through in the rendering or the drawings right now. Can you tell us your approach there?
Yeah, that would obviously, in order to create that into a deck, there is a tear off going on for that, because that right now is just a slope roof. So we would do a tear off on that and properly flash it, properly drain it, and put a decking material on it that allows proper drainage.
Mr. Strickland, you have more?
I think as you develop those details, you need to submit them to staff for record.
Okay.
I'll add with my comments. I guess I was aligned with Mr. Strickland. I think you're here for a final approval, not a concept approval. So that's why we are asking these detailed questions, because we're assuming you're close to being able to go to permit. So we are going to press a little bit more on the details. Related to the front of the building, I would agree that I need more details of how you're going to restructure that roof and or creates that deck, and what decking material you're putting on it, and what you'll see from the street. Because right now that looks very delicate, and my hunch is that is not going to be as delicate as it's shown right now. It looks like 10 inches deep, where maybe it is, but I think once you get all the decking material and the roofing material on the front elevation, that's going to be larger and thicker and more dominant. If you are doing a tear off, I'd encourage you to remove the large overhang that's on all sides, because right now, you're going from a roof to a extension and almost creation of that second floor. So I would encourage you to make that more integrated than applied, like you get stuck a railing on top of an old roof. If you are going to tear off and rebuild with that. The black brick, I would agree with what my other commission members have said. Since this is the beauty of what is across the street, or the uniqueness is that it highlights the retail business separate from the second floor of that building. Here, you're going to be a single occupant, or I'm sorry, it's going to be a double, correct? Here,
correct.
But a dedicated residential use. So the black brick to me is a little confusing. A lighter color or maintaining the red brick to me would be more appropriate. To respect what was there and not try to bring as much focus on that front area like across the street. Let your building stand on its own, but have a similar look and feel as across the street. Finally, the front window on the first floor, I would favor changing that from a fixed unit window with a transom to a standard double hung, what is used throughout the rest of the house. To me, that looks a little foreign compared to everything else. And knowing how people will probably want to put shades and so forth for privacy, it would give you a little bit more opportunity for daylight within the space too, if you could have that central mutton or mullion and align your shades with that.
I'd like to comment on that because, again, I heard what you just said as far as the front window, but that is an extremely large opening for double hungs. So as you see, we kind of showed it as, if he goes back, you'll see. It's an extremely large opening for double hung windows.
And it might, you might get to split it into two double hungs with a central mutton, and maybe that's not appropriate.
That's even too big for two double hung. You'd have to put multiple. That opening is. I'm going to tell you what the size that opening is. That opening is entirely too big for two double hungs. And you're talking about it's an 11-foot opening.
Okay, fair enough. But I'd encourage you where your mullions lands to integrate it more with the rest of the house. Everything else has a double hung, and then you have this window on the front.
I respect that and understand, but you see the current condition, the opening, which obviously we're trying to maintain that existing opening. So I felt that putting fixed windows in there with some type of just transom above to give it some, just a little more aesthetic characteristic to it would suffice. And if you look at it, you see it's divided into 4 sections. So like I said, it's an 11-foot opening by 6 foot. So yeah.
Understand, and fair enough. If the materiality, if the opening is too large for what I'm stating, then maybe storefront is appropriate here, because I'm assuming that's what you're proposing here, or are you proposing vinyl?
Sorry, say again.
Are you proposing?
You're coming over muffled a little bit. If you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you proposing storefront on the first floor or a vinyl window like you stated for the rest of the building?
Aluminum clad, just like the rest of the property.
Okay, I'm sorry, I heard vinyl. So it's aluminum clad windows and aluminum clad front window?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I may have said vinyl clad. I apologize for that. Yeah.
That's okay. That's
yeah, and they're in there. They're gelled windows. I put the specifications in there, and we've gotten a quote from them to not only do the double hungs but also do the door and the fixed window on the front.
okay. I'd encourage you just to match in. Look at your mullion spacing between your transom and the main window to have it align better with the double hungs with the rest of the property. So maybe it is not a true double hung, but it at least blends better with what is used throughout the entire property. And then finally, your front door in the brick area, I would encourage you to match the other doors that you're using through the property, because it looks like you have 2 different styles of doors that are fairly adjacent to each other.
Correct.
And I would use the same color so that it just you have the simplicity of the black and white going here, which I think is very elegant, and I just would like to see it consistent across the entire property.
Okay.
And then on this rendering, you don't show the brackets, but on the last rendering, you had 4 brackets or the elevations. Oh, this one. Here you go. This one has the 4 brackets. And then I think
there are only 2. That was for some reason in the last meeting. That was a concern for one of the gentlemen.
One of the gentlemen, they wanted us to have the these brackets for historical reasons, even though the house doesn't have them originally.
I think
I just felt that adding a couple more kind of maybe brought a little more value to it.
Well, I think the beauty of this elevation with the fascia board and the single brackets, it appears that was the original installation. I'll let Carl and Don comment more on that if they felt, based on this type of house historical context, if more brackets are appropriate or not. Carl or Don, do you have any feedback on that?
Madam Chair, I would say just the single brackets as they are here. I think they're more worried about some like this detailing, and there are little, you can see looking up close, there are some details in the fascia. I think those were the details. You don't need multiple brackets because there aren't any existing currently, except for the single ones down here. So the second one up here would not be necessary, but some of this other detailing should be.
But you don't think aesthetically adding the other 2, you think you're saying no, don't add the 2, or we can if we want to?
I would only add the ones down at the bottom, not the one in the middle, because it's not there currently, and that one I don't think would be appropriate.
Okay.
I think they're probably, if you maintain or replace the brackets that are there, that would meet the aesthetic of what the previous committee member was alluding to, and I think our staff is alluding to, is that maintaining that fascia board detail would also be, I would say, more of a requirement versus encouragement, because you have that beautiful detail there. If you can maintain it or replicate it, that's what I would be in favor for.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one of the big concerns, is that once we get into construction of this, a lot of this stuff is old and brittle. So I would say that you're probably not going to maintain those. They're going to have to be replaced just based upon the age and the condition of them. And again, that's all. Again, it's just preference. I respect your opinion. I just thought it added value to have a couple more in there, but we'll go with what is original.
We're saving you some money here, right?
Okay, well, thank you.
So, I mean, I think overall you're doing a very nice renovation. I think the devil's in the details, and we just need to see more details related to that front porch and how you're expanding or changing the roof to that porch, and how and what is going to be seen from the road. To Mr. Strickland, like I mentioned, the gutters, the thickness of that material and the decking and the gutters, and you are directly on a public way, so that is why it's more important for us to understand it, because obviously you have a great house and a great location, and we want to make sure that public way is safe.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, the focus now is on the front deck and drainage and the gutter system.
And the color and windows, I think all of those go together there.
Well, the color of the windows are all black, aren't they, Michael?
Yeah,
Sorry, the color of
I
the
thought we were okay with that.
Yeah, the color of the brick. I'm sorry, I
Brick, yeah.
How important is this color of the brick, though? Because especially since the person across the street, I just think aesthetically that red looks horrible.
I agree. I think that red's horrible.
I mean, that's not that wasn't a historical part of that house. That was added on by itself before the historical society started all this, so it's just horrendous, and that's why the people across the street painted it.
I could almost see, like, if you don't want the black, maybe going to a gray, but from a designer standpoint, yeah, that red is horrible. So I can't emphasize enough to the committee that I just think
correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes the design is personal preference. So you may like red, the next person may like pink, and I'm doing a lot to this. I got a lot of money tied up. I have a lot of money sitting here with these meetings. I'd like to, over a color, not have this held up because of a color, especially. I'm sorry to be adamant about the red, but the red just looks horrible. In fact, everybody, anyway, that's okay.
I think our staff may have some feedback on that if you wanted to hear like what would be appropriate or not.
Yeah, I would like to hear
I
that.
didn't mean to cut you off though. Did you have additional things to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We should remember that all projects are taken on a case-by-case basis, and that although there are other items in the neighborhood that can be looked at for precedence, each is taken on its own. If a brick is not painted, it should probably not be painted again. Again, to Mr. Edmonds' points earlier, it's more problematic and can cause issues down the road. Thank you.
Paint?
Paint, yes.
Almost every house in Ohio City is painted. I don't understand that one.
I think he's referring to the bricks and some
No,
paint.
I understand that, but they paint brick all over the country. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm astonished at this one.
Yeah, to be quite honest with you, I'm going to go out and reassess it. I don't even know if that is the original color of that brick.
Well, I would encourage you to do that. I mean, per our standards and our requirements, typically, if a brick is painted, then it can be repainted. If it is not painted,
Carl,
then
could you go
should
back
be
to
maintained.
the image of the, okay? And the reason I say that is when you look at it, there you go. If you look at the mortar joints also, I don't believe that is the original color of that brick. And to be quite honest with you, I haven't spent that much time investigating it because I just wasn't that concerned about it, but I will definitely look into that because I do not believe that is the original brick color nor the original mortar color.
And if you look at the sill,
Excuse me, but in fact, Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but in fact, Michael's correct because inside the brick is exposed and it's the deep maroon color. Original, bricks were how they were made years ago.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, if you even look at the window, the lintel on that front window has been painted to match the brick. So I mean, I'd bet everything that is not the original brick color. So I hope we can get over that barrier.
That it does look like it's painted by looking at it on Google. So if you're proposing to paint it, I think we can support that if it's already painted and then a standard color. you know, I would
You,
say,
you can see it. It's clearly been painted. It's not even been painted.
okay. Well, I mean,
So
we do have some
let's just do one
members.
thing at a time, please, because I've had this sitting for a long time, and so the color. Okay, if this is painted, which it clearly is, can we paint it? I just want to know what you will accept. Is black okay, or should we go to gray? I don't care. I mean, either gray or black, because it's just aesthetically more appealing. As your point, when you drive by, I mean, look, that red would just look at the house is white already, and that red sticks out like a sore thumb. You know, so is gray okay or black okay?
I personally would recommend something in the gray family. I'll let Ian, you've heard from other commission members, they do not, support the black color. So
Okay.
I would encourage you to look at, grays, but I will, have my fellow commission members comment if they disagree. I just think the black is harsh based on,
Okay.
the size of
Yeah,
it and use
that's
of
fair.
your
No,
house.
that's fine. So
That's
can
fair.
everybody agree on gray? And if there is gray, does it have to be a certain shade? Because there's 500,000 shades of gray. So I just want to I'm not being smart here.
Nope,
I
it's
want to
a
tease
valid
you.
question.
Forward.
We can't do the
Quick point of
design.
order.
Right.
Could the applicants please allow the commission members to give their feedback and not interrupt? And this will make the meeting go a little bit quicker and you'll get your answers.
I was just trying to get the
I
colors.
understand. Please let
All right,
the
go ahead.
commission speak.
Well,
Go
and just reinforce that, Ian, you are the designers and the owners. We can't tell you what exact color, you have to do. We're giving you the opportunity to pick the color you want of that family and then bring it back to us. But I think something in the gray family would be more appropriate here than the black. Mr.
Fair enough.
Strickland,
Thank you.
You had additional feedback?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think a warm gray would be certainly, like a less severe and less commercial looking than black. Also looking a little closer at these, at the Google Earth and the facade images, I just want to make sure there's clearly a lot of mortar repair and masonry repair work where it looks like there's some lintel jacking. And I just want to make sure that you're going to be taking care of that as part of the work on the facade.
Correct.
Mr. Strickland, did you have additional questions or comments?
No, I don't.
Perfect. Okay. With that being said, if there are no more questions or comments, would somebody like to make a motion? Would someone like to make a motion with conditions?
I'd like to make the motion that the proposal be approved with the condition of the color of the brick. I'm not sure what the exact appropriate wording for that should be.
The brick color be reevaluated from blacks to a something within the gray family.
Thank you.
Could I add or make a recommendation of adding to those conditions?
Yes.
That the brackets details be changed from 4 to 2 and reevaluates the fascia detailing to try to align with what is currently there. The windows on the first floor be reevaluated for its main mullion location to align better with the double hung, and that the details of the deck get submitted to staff for review and approval for how the roof will be converted into a deck area and how it will be the water management will be handled around that deck.
Thank you. Agreed for the motion.
Okay. Thank you. So we have a motion with conditions. Do we have a second? Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland.
Madam
Any
Chair,
further-
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Oh, Mr. Pettit, do you have a comment before we move on?
Madam Chair, I just want to clarify that all of those items and the conditions can be referred to staff for final approval.
I personally am fine with that. Mr. Edmond, you made the motion. Is that acceptable to you?
Yes.
So the applicant will take all of the details or all the things that we just mentioned to staff. And if they're acceptable, they can approve. If not, it will come back in front of us. All right, so we have a motion with conditions. Second, any further discussion?
I have a question. Explain to me changing the details to and sending them to staff versus coming back in front of your panel again. How does that work?
You can continue the progression of your design, address the concerns that we just brought up, submit your drawings to staff. They will review it, give you any feedback, or tell you if you're approved. If you're approved, then you are complete with the process. If they're not satisfied with it, you will then be required to come back in front of us.
Okay, so when you say staff, is that Carl?
Carl and Mr. Pettit. Yes, Mr. Brunges and Mr. Pettit. Submit it to them.
That's what I wanted to. Just wanted clarification on that. So, okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Ms. Anderson,
No.
Mr. Bonezzi,
No.
Mr. Colicchio,
No.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasik,
No.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
Madam Chair, we have a tie vote. The motion fails.
All right, so with that, then you have the
Don, has the director left the meeting, the planning director?
The director left the meeting about half an hour ago. So we are now down to 8 members and we now have a tie.
All right, thank you.
So for feedback for the applicants, the motion did fail. That means you are not approved with the current design. You do have the opportunity to revise your design and submit a different approach for this solution or this location, correct, Don? And
Yes, I believe a bit, but I think in order to bring it back, the project has to be revised substantially, and I will defer to our council, but it will definitely have to come back to the commission for another presentation of I think something that better addresses all of the concerns of the commission.
Mr. Pettit, this is Kevin Roberts. You're correct.
And does that help the applicant to understand the next steps in this process?
So I mean, I understand exactly what this means. Now, how do we schedule for another meeting? And how soon can we do that?
I think you would need to submit a new presentation to us.
Correct.
On the staff level, we would have to determine if it's sufficient enough to bring back to the commission. Then we would schedule it at a future meeting, probably in March at the earliest. Our other agendas are currently booked, but I think you should contact staff and we can talk about it offline.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, excuse me one second, Michael, do you understand what substantial improvements need?
Yeah, I understand what they're looking for.
I need that because this is going into March, okay? And like I said, I have a lot of money sitting here. So is it gutters? Is it white, black? Is gutters can't be that difficult to assess. So I just need to know what we need to improve so we can get this okayed.
Sure, I think an offline would be appropriate to, go into this in further detail. This is not the right forum at this point.
That's fine.
But
I have a good idea of what we need to do. So thank you.
Okay, and as Mr. Pettit mentioned, he'd be happy to arrange an offline meeting with you, so you can talk to staff to talk about this in more detail.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our certificates of appropriateness. We'll now move on to our concept plan reviews. This will be for review and comment only. We will not be taking any vote action right at this time. We'd like to welcome the applicant to open your mic, announce yourself, and tell us about your project.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Matthew Weimer with WXE Development, and also with me is Gregory Soltis of RDL Architects. Thank you all for having us this morning. We're excited to present this project to you all. It's an interesting one. It's in Little Italy on Mayfield Road. It includes 3 parcels that we see as one whole project. The third parcel fronts Fairview Court, or Piggy Street as it's known in the neighborhood. We're kind of still determining whether lot consolidation makes sense. And I will let Greg now take us through the presentation.
So as Matt mentioned, and good morning, everyone, by the way, thanks for having us. As Matt mentioned, you can see the asterisks on the map. So that's the location of the property within Little Italy, which is the dashed line that shows the outline of Little Italy. Next slide. And this shows the property in context in more detail. That's the actual shape of the 3 properties. Next slide. So contextually, we have a couple slides here that show the existing building. So you can see number 6, which is in the lower, at the very bottom in the center. Those are the buildings that we are addressing on Mayfield Road. And then you can see number 7 is to the west. That's a new building that went up a couple of years ago. Number 4 and 3 are to the east. So you can see the Alta House and the bocce courts there. And East 125th Street, looking down East 125th. Further up the hill on number 1 are the townhouses that are exist there. Next slide. And then this shows the context of Piggy Street. So you can see Piggy Street is a little bit different. It doesn't really have sidewalks. It's really an alley street. It's called Piggy Street because I believe back in the day a bunch of butchers were on it, so there'd be pigs running up and down the street. And those were the pigs that got away, I guess. But it's more, it's got some houses on it. It also has some buildings that feel a little bit more potentially like storage, garage-ish or, warehousey-ish. It's an interesting little alley. Next slide. And then this is an aerial that shows the building. So A and B are the buildings on Mayfield. C is the building that's on Piggy Street. And you can see the aerial with Valerio's across the street. That's the mustard yellow building that had been updated recently for Valerio's restaurant. Next slide. And you can see, okay, I'm sorry, Carl, can you go back real quick? I just wanted to point out the clump of green in the center of the 3 letters. So there's this courtyard, that, or really a collection of courtyards that exist in the center of all 3 properties. Next slide. And some more aerial views. You can the slide on the right shows the 2 buildings in the lower left-hand side of the image, and then the rest of Mayfield Road. And then the slide on the left shows the Alta House, which is nearby. Next slide. So this is our site plan. So we are showing renovating building A and building B, joining the courtyards. And you can see where it says alleys to Mayfield Road. One of the big things that we're trying to do with this proposal is create the front doors on Mayfield Road, utilize the alleys and highlight the alleys. These little alleys are kind of unique to Little Italy, and they're kind of special little things that I think sometimes don't get enough attention. So we'd like to, even for building C, which is proposed on Piggy Street, we want kind of the front door to be on Mayfield Road. And then you can see we're unifying the courtyards to a degree. There still will be some level of separation between the upper courtyard and the lower courtyard, but there will be a connection between the two. And we want to preserve the big tree that's in the center of the courtyard. Next slide. This shows a more simple view, but you can also see highlighted or dashed like porches that are attached to the back of the building and terraces that kind of will give residents on the upper floors outdoor living space and a view to the courtyard. Next slide. These are some historic buildings, some imagery that we got from I think the Western Reserve Historical Society and also the county. So on the left, you can see the two buildings. The 12408 is the shorter building that has the arrow pointing to it, and 12404 is the taller building. So then on the slide on the right, or the image on the right, shows a more detailed view of 12408, which the architecture of that building is much more refined than the architecture of the other building. Next slide. And here they are shown again. 12408 is really kind of like, it's a building that was built the way it looks today. 12404 had an addition put on the front. And it was, I think, a much more utilitarian sort of building. It's got wood, these porches over the front, and not a lot of architectural detailing on it otherwise. Next slide. This was the sign you can see in the image, and Matt found the sign in the building. Next slide.
Yeah.
He's going to use it as art, I think, right?
Yeah, I plan to. It was actually behind drywall holding up the stairs.
Yeah. And then here's an image of the building, the taller building, 12404 in 1971. So this is the addition on the front. And it looks like it's been altered many times. One of the things that happened in Little Italy, in many Cleveland neighborhoods, as the population declined and there wasn't as much demand for retail storefronts, so some of the retail storefronts were converted into residential space. And this was converted into a residential space, which is not a totally appropriate condition on Mayfield Road, especially, but also because the building was originally built to house a commercial space. And so it doesn't even have an elevated floor. So we're proposing to turn it back into a commercial space, which would be great for Mayfield Road. Next slide.
The original front facade of the structure was actually set back from what you're seeing here. And that was to allow service to come in from the front. Delivery. So there were vaults basically under the street, and they would open up to take delivery of products and store them down in the cellar. When that practice wasn't being done anymore, and as Greg said, conditions changed from a market standpoint, we assumed someone decided commercial was not sustainable, added the front portion that you see. And I'll just quickly mention there's a second addition to the original structure in the rear. Originally, this building would have had a kind of steel fire escape looking access, vertical access. At some point that was removed and a kind of enclosed stair was added.
Yeah, and the stair that was added is kind of sinking and tilted. It's kind of hanging on to the building right now. Next slide. So this shows the courtyard and the alleys that lead to the courtyard and the big tree we'd like to save in the back. Next slide. And again, another view of the courtyard. And you can see this actually was added, the rear of that building. It looks seamless here, but if you look at it closely, it was added. Next slide. Okay, so building A currently includes 5 apartments, 1 on the first floor, 2 on each of the floors above. And we're proposing to put office space on the first floor and then residences, so 2 condominium residences, 1 on each floor above. Next slide. These are some existing conditions photos. These are the balconies that hang off the front, which are kind of scary to walk out on. Most people wouldn't even walk out on them. I walked out on one day just because I had to. But no, next slide. And then this shows the rear, the fire escape that hangs off the side of the building in the alley. And then you can see the interior of the stairwell that was added on. Next slide. And then this is the view directly of the rear facade across the courtyard. Next slide. So this shows the floor plans of what we're planning on inside, or planning on doing inside. So
These are actually the existing.
Oh yeah, this is existing. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so these are the existing conditions. So you can see the unit on the bottom, and then you can see the 2 units, one on either half on the upper floors. And then the olive color on the top shows that addition that was put on the back. Next slide. So this is what we're proposing. So we're proposing taking off those stairs on the back, building a new stairwell with an elevator for the residences, and then turning the first floor into office space. I mean, pretty much otherwise leaving the floor plan pretty much like this. There'll be some interior partitions for a bathroom down there and a conference room that we're still working on, but it'll be mostly open, retaining the inset entry to the building. And then on the upper floors, this would be the layout of the condominium unit. So it keeps the living space up towards the front because, you know, Mayfield Road's a pretty active road, and tucks the bedroom off the alley and creates the entry hall in the back with the bath. And then there's a balcony that would overlook the courtyard. Next slide. So there's the concept that we have for the buildings is there's one that we're restoring, one that we're updating, and this is the one that we're updating and studying sort of like how to reapply new balconies onto the building and explore some sort of transitional architecture. And then the building in the back will be a new building. Next slide. So you see, we're trying to unify, like create a new retail storefront at the bottom, create it in thirds, unify that with the balconies above and these brackets that will, you know, kind of gracefully curve and lead to columns that would hold the balconies, or, you know, bring that vertical nature of the thirds all the way up, and then highlighting the entry with a different material and maybe some sort of little tower structure that's reminiscent of some of the other buildings on Mayfield Road that do have tower structures over their entries. Next slide.
It's really sort of a piecemeal building in its current form. So trying to introduce some symmetry and order to the front facade is not necessarily the easiest of things.
Yeah, but I like the direction that we're going in highlighting the entry and then composing the rest of the building in thirds that way. So this is building B, which includes 4 apartments, 2 up and 2 down, and we're proposing 1 condominium for sale unit above, and then turning the bottom floor into office space. Next slide. These are some existing conditions photos. So you can see this, the one on the top is standing on Mayfield Road looking up at the bays. The one on the left shows like the detail where the brick meets this kind of like a concrete material that had been applied to the front. And then the rear photo shows the rear, or the bottom photo shows the rear of the building. And you can see where the openings used to be and how they've been filled in and reused in different ways. Next slide.
So we're going to reconstitute each of those openings for the office space on the ground floor. And there's a series of similar openings running along the east elevation that we plan to do the similar treatment.
And this shows the alley conditions on the west and east sides of the, or no, this is the
between the 2 buildings.
Yeah, between the 2 buildings. Next slide. And then these are some photos that show the courtyard behind. It's kind of like a panoramic view to try to give an idea. The one on the top shows the 2 buildings and how their courtyards are separated by a wall. And the courtyard on the right is actually lower than the courtyard on the left. So we're going to create some stairs and keep a retaining wall, but create an opening with some stairs that lead down to the lower courtyard. And then the middle image shows what the lower courtyard looks like from the back of the building, you know, all the way along that wall, really all the way around. It's kind of a 360 sort of view. And then the bottom image shows kind of, if you were looking at the alley on the left and taking a panoramic sort of view, and then looking into the courtyard. So you can kind of see the relationship between the alley and the courtyard. Next slide. And then this shows the condition of that easternmost alley against this building and the condition of the building adjacent where they added this concrete and they have like an air conditioner unit on the concrete. So it just shows the existing condition of the alley that we'd like to clean up. Next slide. So this is the how we propose to use the space, creating office space on the bottom, residence above. The residence would be entered off the alley. Next slide. So these are the existing conditions on the first floor with an apartment in the front and the back, and the second floor with apartment in the front and the back. Next slide. You can see the circulation core exists on in the center. So this shows the plan for the retail space on the first floor on the left, where we'll have a front retail space, and then we're utilizing the vertical circulation core and putting storage and a bathroom kind of hidden in behind all the storage to kind of keep the space open and try to be efficient. And then in the back, putting a kitchenette and then a conference room. So the kitchenette is also engaged into that core. And then on the second floor plan, you can see how the bedroom and like a private living space and a bath is in the back. And then in the front, you have the public sort of living space that faces Mayfield Road with a half bath off of it. And then we're proposing a rooftop deck. Next slide. This is a rendered floor plan for the first floor, again, showing that space. And, you know, we're trying to utilize the courtyard. So the conference room and the kitchenette, we're going to reuse those openings that exist there already and let those all be doors that open up to the rear courtyard. Next slide. This shows a concept for the front, how we intend to clean up the brick and use a sort of copper and black color palette for the front. Next slide. And this is a concept for the back where we'd like to create a trellis structure. You know, gardens are a big thing in Little Italy, so we want to let the vegetation kind of go up. And then when you're inside, you'll be looking out that door. You'll see like the colorful flowers that grow up the trellis structure, and then create an upper and a lower sort of outdoor living space. Next slide. And then the last building is a proposed new build. So we would demolish the existing 3-story structure that's there and build a new building that has parking underneath and 2 condominium units above. Next slide. These are some existing conditions of the building. It's really weird to go through. My grandparents came over from Italy and my great-grandparents, and my grandfather used to just like build stuff, you know, like he'd be like, oh, I found this toilet on the, you know, on the side of the road and, you know, he'd make a bathroom downstairs. So I feel like they did a lot of that, and these spaces are really hard to maneuver through in this building. It was interesting. Next slide. And down in the basement, what did you say?
He did not do this one though.
No, my grandpa didn't do that one. But even downstairs, they had like on the pipes, it said like caldo and freddo for like the hot water and the cold water. It was kind of cool.
That I did find that in the cellar of this structure though.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Exactly. That's what it had there. So this shows, you know, the entrance to the cellar from the back and
the front actually.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. The front. So the bottom right is the front facade that faces Piggy Street. And then where you see that window in the very bottom right corner, below that is the entrance down to the cellar that you can see on the top photos. Next slide. And this is the side of the building viewed from the yards of the houses on 125th. Next slide. So this is what we're proposing. So Piggy Street would be on the left and the courtyard would be on the right. The first floor would be a garage that has 4 parking stalls. It would be partially open, so it's not completely closed. And then there would be a stair tower that faces the courtyard that gets you up to the floors above. And you can see the layout of the condominium on the top of the slide. So it would have these decks and open spaces that face the Piggy Street and the courtyard. So there's a certain level of layering and permeability that occurs on those sides of the building. Whereas on the long sides of the building, there is some openness on the east side of the building, which is the bottom of the slide, or the bottom of the floor plan. And then the top of the floor plan has more of a solid structure that we're proposing using maybe some sort of glass brick to let light in. But that's to create privacy from the house that's next door, very close next door. Next slide. So this is the basic structure, looking at the section, and you can see there's a significant change in grade from Piggy Street down into the courtyard against Mayfield Road. Next slide. So this is the concept. Those plant or tree-looking branch graphics are metal panels that are permeable. We took inspiration from the giant tree in the courtyard. We're not set totally on that particular graphic just yet. We're exploring different things, but that, along with this layering of the space and having outdoor living space, or even just a recess, before you get to the window, is creating like these very nice transitional zones that in a very dense environment allow light to come in, allow you to have views in and out, but those views are partially obstructed, so you can still feel like more private. Next slide. This is what the view would be on Piggy Street. The idea behind the building was that even though it's a new building, when people see it, and you'll see in the rendering, it looks like it could have been a garage or a little industrial building that existed there already that was renovated to turn it into a living space. Next slide. So the dark gray areas, or the medium gray areas, would be brick. You can see the metal structure, or the metal fenestration, those panels. Next, and you can see how it's open to parking below on the bottom. Next slide. And this shows everything together, so how it would function. And the stairwell would actually get you down to the courtyard from this building. Next slide. And that's the units above. And you can see the deck spaces on the corners of the building, one that looks out to Piggy Street and one to the courtyard. Next slide. These are some inspiration of different types of metal panels that allow that, partial permeability. Next slide. And here's some inspiration for the architecture of the building. So you can see it's kind of a more transitional architecture that's rooted in some of the historical forms and window placements, but has a contemporary feel to it. Next slide. So here are some renders, initial renders of the building. So the top left would be the view on Piggy Street, looking north on Piggy Street. So that brick mass in the distance would be the Alta House. And you can see the garage, and then there's also we put a man door there, so there is the ability to enter the unit from Piggy Street. And then you can see the recessed balconies above with the metal panels, permeated metal panels outside of it. The view on the top right shows an aerial looking northwest, and then the view on the bottom is a nighttime view that kind of explores a different pattern on the metal panel, but what the building will look like on its east facade. So from the backyards of the buildings that are 125th. Next slide.
Also, I think does a good job of showing permeability. This elevation is composed primarily of glass, whereas the west elevation, which is serving as really the only shearing wall, is all masonry. So this side of the building, from this view, it's very open and light feeling. The panels are just meant to give a bit of privacy in sort of a creative way.
Yes. And like I said, we're exploring the patterning of the panels and how we can tie that into the, maybe even tie it into the Italian culture of the neighborhood, or like one of our concepts was to, kind of mimic and abstract the tree that is in the courtyard. So we welcome any questions or comments you might have.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll start off with feedback from the local committee.
Good morning, Commission. We looked at this maybe, I think, back in October. The committee liked the direction that they were going with the front buildings on Mayfield Road. We welcome the idea of having for sale units there and creating a office space in the one building. we talked about the demolition, and I think based on the condition, I think we would support the demolition. The back building, there was a few concerns. The one was regarding the metal panels. I think people are not yet wrapped around the idea of putting that. It's kind of taking it to a different level of modern design. And I think the other issue came about with the accessibility to the garage door because of it being on the court and being able to maneuver cars in and out. But overall, I think the committee was very much liking what they were seeing here in the direction that the developer's taking. So that's it.
All right, thank you for that feedback. We'll now open the floor we'll open the floor to the commission for questions or comments. Mr. Edmond, Mr. Brunges, from staff standpoint, would you like to give us feedback first, and then we'll go to you, Mr. Edmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A site visit was conducted to the location. I don't have additional photos at this time, but I can give those next time. The building in the rear, there was a permit originally for a 2-story dwelling, which appears to have been unbuilt in 1903. But the building first floor on the rear dates to 1904. In 1906, there was a pantry addition. And then in 1912, they added the 2nd story to the front that faces Piggy Street, and then the 2-story rear addition, making it a 3-family residence. At that point, there were various violation notices over the years, one including covering the front of the basement access. There were issues with the stairwells. They are very steep. They are not to code. And then in 1971, they proposed the enclosed porches, and here's what it looked like still in 1971. That was due to go to BZA, and then they withdrew, but it looks like after 1971, they built the enclosures anyway, and I could not find any permits to go along with those changes. But here's what it looked like prior to what it is currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brunges. Mr. Edmond?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I would say that I really do appreciate what you're doing functionally here, getting that office or retail back on the first floor and kind of revitalizing this. And I appreciate your evident sensitivity to the context and the history here. I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments. On the 12404 building, the Mayfield Road elevation, if I'm reading this elevation correctly, just looking at the roof here, this one, just looking at the roof form, it looks like the balconies have a sort of a bay shape to them, mimicking the building to the left. Am I reading that correctly?
No, the roof structure does, but the balconies themselves would be rectangles.
So it's rectangle, so the sort of the form that they are now.
Yes.
I think I recognize the challenge of composing this facade, and personally, I think you've done a good job on that. I'm curious on both of these two buildings, what the materials of that rooftop level addition are.
You mean the like where the deck will be? And
yeah, like the stair enclosure, and it looks like you've got sort of a mullion-less glass barrier there on the deck, and the other one looks like it has sort of a black steel frame.
And that's kind of where we are right now, is more with black metal and glass, but we are still exploring different material options. But the intent is for it to be very contemporary, but to also be hidden, right? So when you're down on the street, you're not going to see it.
I think that contrast makes sense. I'm a little more concerned about the black on the elevation of the 12408 building and the existing bays there, which, and as I mentioned on previous project we were looking at, I see a lot of dark gray and black going on, and it seems like a big trend, but it does seem a little severe for this building, which, as you mentioned, is a little bit more architecturally refined. So I might ask you to think about that. And one other, so we'll move to the rear building. One question, it appears from the elevations that there's a garage door on the Piggy Street side, but then the sides are just open to that same space.
Yes. So the on the east side, on this east facade, they are open.
Okay. Is there any sort of security there, or is it, we have the door on the one side, but then it's just open to the side?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't discussed all that yet, if there potentially would be security cameras, but it's a very narrow space, so it's not easy to get back there and get into the garage because it juts up against the rear yards of the houses off 125th, and there's a retaining wall there that goes up like between 3 and 5 feet.
Mhm.
So there's almost like a natural barrier there already. But we had that conversation, and for now, we think keeping it open this way is a good solution.
Okay. And I really like what you're doing with the alleys and the courtyard, unifying the courtyard, and really turning that into something. I think there's a lot of potential in that as an outdoor space. I will echo the neighborhood design review comments about the metal panels. And I think for me, it's really, a lot of it's about the scale of it. It really feels like a super graphic will be more appropriate on a much larger building, or a building that you would see from a distance, or maybe moving more quickly. And as far as the materiality, I'm not sure exactly what that material is, but I think the sheen and the quality and the color of it will be very important. But I think that I understand what you're trying to achieve in terms of layers and sort of obscuring and privacy. But I think that the quality of the graphic image itself, one of the images you had a much more organic graphic to it, and also the scale, the scale of the visual elements that would help bring it down to a more, alley street scale would help it a lot. The other thing is, one of the renderings of the east elevation appeared to show sort of vegetation growing on it, like it might be a trellis, which I think is interesting. You mentioned that on the back of one of the other buildings. So I think there are ways to achieve what you're trying to do architecturally with graphics that would feel more appropriate to the scale.
Those are all like very, very valid comments, and we have been exploring different patterns, potentially, like the difference between more organic patterns, or maybe something that relates more to the history of the neighborhood or the Italian culture. But yeah, when we come back to you, we'll have something much more refined to show you based on your comments and also the feedback from the design review committee.
And I think in one of the reference images, there was an example of a similar panel condition right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't as bold or large as what we're showing here. I think something more along these lines is probably appropriate scale-wise. And texturally, this is kind of what we had in mind. Again, we're still kind of tweaking. And it would be a custom pattern that's laser cut in large metal sheets and then affixed to the building.
Yeah, we even like this green gold sort of color for the metal.
Mr. Edmond, do you have further comments?
Thank
I
you.
would echo what Mr. Edmond stated, because I was actually spot on. And this was what I would recommend you leaning towards something a little bit more organic, smaller scale, really pulling from your reference or your inspiration of the tree, so it doesn't feel such a large, the larger graphic does look like something that would be appropriate when you're viewing it from afar, but your point of reference is going to be so close to all of these graphics. So, Mr. Bernese, I'm sorry to jump in front of you.
Thank you.
It's okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep my comments short and sweet since they're mostly echoing my fellow commission members, but I do want to commend both you as the architect and the developer for being so sensible in these projects. And I think the first thing that caught my eye, one, is you were removing density, and we keep now this isn't pertaining to you, but when we talk about density, that gets to a point where you still have to be livable. And I think both of you have, very, very well understood that these were overly compacted before. And now I'm looking at the plans, which I know we don't have too much purview over what happens on the interior of the building. I do commend you for giving a very nice livable interior to these projects.
Thank you.
And echoing off of terrible with names, Mr. Edmonds' comments about the roof deck, I think when you start doing perspectival elevations or seeing this roof deck in perspective and seeing the, like sight lines in section, I think that will really give, a headway of, do we need to be concerned about those roof decks, or are they going to be removed? And if we are going to see them, I would agree with Mr. Edmond, right? We want to not have a giant high levels of contrast between the sky and the architecture. We're prone to very gray kind of skies, which any sort of high levels of contrast are going to immediately pop out in such a delicate neighborhood. So that's for the first two. And for the last building, I'm very happy to see the kind of the tectonic moves that you're doing, right? You have a Pittsburgh problem here, as I like to call it, of an extremely dense site, and how do you get light into a site like that? And windows typically can only do so much because they face out laterally. So using these tectonic shifts of layering is going to allow light to kind of really filter down into the space and create some really elegant moments, I think, in this beautiful courtyard situation. But as I would, not to beat the dead horse, but to echo, I think the graphics of those panels and the way that the screens are going to be articulated just needs further study. But being only a preliminary schematic design review or level, I'm very impressed with the way that you're going with this development project. And I think it's something that the neighborhood does need, are these kind of sensible attentions to the historic nature, but also how can we make it improved? So overall, thank you very much for taking on this project.
Thank you. Could I just ask one quick question for some clarification? With respect to your comment on the roof terraces and the unfortunately typical gray skies that we experience in Cleveland, were you saying you prefer to see some contrast established between the sky and the tones of the structure, or the opposite?
The opposite. Sorry, I didn't clarify myself. So
Okay.
I would not like to see contrast. You kind of want those elements to hide away, so you only read the original architecture. But I think elevations have a tendency to lie, right? There are things that recede very, very far back in elevation, but as soon as you flatten it in orthogonal projection, right, it's like, oh, it's on the front of the building. It's reality, it could be 30, 40 feet back. That's why I think some perspectival views or even perspectival elevations are really helpful in kind of getting that point across to people so that the concern dies away. It's a trick I use all the time, but that's my personal usage. So I hope that clarifies.
It did. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Ganezi. Mr. Strickland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to reinforce Commissioner Edmonds' comments about the colors that are currently rendered on Mayfield Road. I think that the black in those bays in the, I think it's 404 building, or could be fairly harsh, and consider something a little lighter on Mayfield Road. As far as the building C, the building in the back, wondering about the height of the proposed building as compared to the existing building. If the applicant will require a side setback variance for that west wall, and how the height of that west wall may impact the neighbor adjacent to the east, and how what consideration has been given to that effect on the adjacent neighbor.
With respect to the west wall, do you mean consideration for the neighbor to the west?
Yes. Then, yeah, the neighbor to the west.
Okay.
So the existing condition and the new condition are not going to be very different because there already is this, you know, wall that extends up right on the property line to the for the neighbor to the west. And this
Can you define specifically what the height difference is between the two?
You know, I'll make sure that I have that information detailed the next time we come see you. But you know, I do believe that this wall is anywhere from maybe 5 to 10 feet higher, but that's only because also the roof has an angle to it on the existing building. But the way that we were going to break this up was by, and this doesn't show it, but we will show you this in the next time we come, is including glass bricks in the wall to let light in for the interior units, but also to create some relief on the brick wall that is existing there. And so in the evening, there'll be light that glows out of them, but there'll also be some relief in this brick wall as it goes back. And then as far as zoning and setbacks, you know, we are proposing to fill the site, which is what the existing condition is under the current zoning code. We would have to seek variances simply because Little Italy itself is illegal according to the current zoning code. But that's something that we're working on with the design guidelines we're working on for Little Italy as well.
Yeah, I live in Tremont and we have exactly the same conditions there.
Right, right.
Houses are built to the lot line, and then when you tear them down, you've got to get a variance to build a new house.
Right.
I understand. I want to make sure that full consideration is given to the possible impact on the neighbor to the west and provide whatever relief you can in addition to getting that variance.
Certainly, and I've written it down, and I will also have a full zoning review next time we come back to you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments for the applicant, Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm in agreement with the comments from my fellow commissioners. I wanted to ask about the end use of the units. Are they all condominiums? Is the commercial space going to be a condominium?
No, all of them are for sale units, right? And then, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
From a legal entity standpoint, yes, they will all be condominiums. The 2 ground floor spaces will be commercial uses, both of which will be offices. And then the condominiums on the 2nd and 3rd floor, in the case of 404, will be residential condominiums, as will both units on the 2nd and 3rd floor in this building on Fairview Court.
So the office units will also be condominiums?
Correct.
Okay. You know, I have found, and you might be fine, but I have found that lenders for condominiums are a little gun shy about mixed use buildings. So you might want to just check with a couple of retail lenders and make sure that you have somebody who will work with you for financing once it becomes time to start marketing these properties.
We have a lender, thank you. They're aware of that detail and comfortable with it.
All right. Yeah, you might want to get more than one because oftentimes one lender doesn't want to make all the loans in a building.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions or comments from the commission? Mr. Brunges.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to throw one thing in. Since this is being treated as one single project in multiple parts, you would probably also want to put together a tree preservation plan, even though we know you are doing it. They're going to ask for an official tree preservation plan to be submitted as well. We can get that just because they are, the residents of Little Italy are very protective of their mature trees.
Thanks, Carl.
Any additional questions or comments from the commission? Does the applicant feel like you have sufficient feedback from the commission to continue your design and return at a future date for your final certificate of appropriateness?
Yes, this was really great. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to seeing you come back.
Likewise.
We look forward to seeing you.
Thanks. We'll move on to our next applicant, which has the same architect and owner, located at 3408 Clifton Avenue, renovation and addition.
It's actually Clinton. I think there may have been a
Oh, I'm
typo
sorry.
on a previous submission.
Might have just
And
checked
then-
out it. That says Clinton. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No problem. Thank you. I won't reintroduce myself and Greg. I'm actually not the property owner here. Two colleagues of ours are, and they asked Greg and I to come in and work with them on this project. So it is a single family home. It's a 2-family parcel. The structure is not in the best shape. There was a fire a few years ago prior to our clients acquiring it. And the intent here is to do a full restoration of the existing structure and then an addition to the rear on what you see as parking currently. And there's a connection between the rear addition, which would house garage, and the existing structure, as you'll see. You want to take us through it, Greg?
Sure. So you can see the location within the neighborhood, and there's the alley on the back, and then Clinton is the street on in the front on the bottom. Next slide. And this is blown up. You can see here the original house is that original sort of triangle up front, and then there was addition added on the right side and the top of it. So we're proposing removing those and restoring the house to as close to its original condition as we can. Next slide. This is the parcel, and it shows, give you a better idea of the streets and the alleys in the neighborhood, and the shape of this parcel compared to the shape of the parcels around it. You can see there's a lot of long, narrow parcels that have residential uses. The parcel right next to us is an industrial use, the big parcel. Next slide. You can go to the next slide, Carl. We're getting real happy with the with the GIS images. This shows building footprints, and then this shows zoning for the neighborhood. This is the county zoning, so it shows it residential, but it's a 2-family, which it notes their residence 2-family condition. Next slide. These are some aerial. The one at the top, so where it says chimney, just to the left of that, you can see the massing of the house. You can see the parking lot that's in the back that the industrial property next door was using. And then on the bottom, that's just looking from the other direction. So again, beyond the chimney, you can see the house and you can see the addition that was added in the back. And then in the foreground is the industrial building, which is set back and onto the alley and has this big green space in front of it. Next slide. And these are 2 more aerial views looking from the other directions. And again, in the top slide, the house is to the right of the chimney. And on the bottom slide, the house is in front of the chimney. And it showed well the existing conditions of the houses next door from an aerial perspective. And then here are images of the houses that are on the street. So you can see there are quite a number of Victorian era structures. There are some new houses added, like the brick structure in 2 and 3, which is a really beautiful interpretation that I think is fitting to the neighborhood. It's not historic, but it looks like it fits in. And then you can see the open green space next to the house in 9 and 10. And there's even a mid-century type building in number 6 there. So there's quite a collection of different types of buildings on the street, but the majority of them tend to be older, from more of the Victorian vintage. Next slide. This is a survey. So you can see that where the house sits on the parcel, it is like angled just a bit. So it's not perfectly parallel to the property lines on the sides. Next slide. This was a zoning review that we actually did for this property, and we do need 1 variance, and that is an area variance. So we're around 150 square feet above the allowable building footprint on the site. Next slides. You can probably go through the whole zoning analysis. Then these, we talked to Tim Barrett, and we're still talking with some other people who have expertise in historical architecture. And this was some information and some references he gave us with regards to Greek architecture, Greek Revival style architecture. We did go to the Block Club a couple of times, got their feedback, and modified our design accordingly. I've been learning a lot about Greek Revival architecture in this process, which has been great. Next slide. And this is, again, a reference image. And these are kind of reference images that are more appropriate to this house, because a lot of the stuff you'll find in the books when you look for Greek Revival architecture are these very elaborate sort of institutional buildings or very like mansion type houses, which this house is not. Next slide. So this is an original, like one of our original proposals. The Block Club proposed us getting rid of the pediment above the door, which we did. Next slide. And this shows the elevation as it currently sits. And what we're planning on doing, because we've been talking again to some other people and that have expertise in this, is elaborating, like making the sides of the door, those trim elements a little bit wider, and just getting the proportions of everything a little bit more fine-tuned, and adding a little bit more detail to the fascia board that sits underneath the eave. Next slide. These are the elevations. So you'll see that the house in the front, the existing house, and this is the proposed addition in the back. Once you see the floor plans, you'll see that this side of the house doesn't have any windows in it. So we're proposing some trellis structures to let some plants grow up there and soften that facade. There is this vertical sort of panel system that goes along the facade. Next slide. This is the view from the alley, so the garage with a man door. And the concept for the addition was to relate to the front house in that we have the same pitch of the roof, the same basic massing, but it sits far back beyond the house. It's white. It's got some reference to like Greek Revival, but it's not Greek Revival. It's contemporary. It's just a cleaned up, simple addition. Next slide. This shows the elevation as it would face the industrial building, so you'd never fully see it this way, but there is a courtyard in the center. So you can see there's a joint in between the original structure and the new structure, so that there's this distinct separation between the two. And then the rear structure has a courtyard between the front portion, which is about a third the size of the rear portion, which includes the garage and the bedroom complex. Next slide. This is the view down from the street on Clinton down this little pedestrian path that leads to the courtyard. So you just get like the building just peeks out and says hello. It's just a little, hey, I'm back here. Next slide. And then this is an aerial showing how the building fits on the rear of the site and takes up the space that is currently the parking lot. Next slide. Another aerial from over the alley that again shows the pedestrian connection all the way through the property. We're proposing like little, picket fences with a gate. Next slide. Another aerial that kind of features the courtyard and how the building in the rear relates to the building in the front. Next slide. Another, and you can see the vertical panels and then the windows that fit, right within the vertical panels. Next slide. Same kind of aerial. Next slide. This is the view if you're walking down the path and you arrive at the courtyard. Next slide. From Clinton, and then that's the corner the little corner that pops out and gives you a peekaboo. Next slide. And then if you were walking from the alley, that's the view and how the living space spills out into the courtyard there, and it'd be like a two-sided fireplace. Next slide. View from the bedroom looking into the courtyard. Next slide. And that's the addition from the kitchen and the interior looking out to the courtyard. And that's it. So again, any comments or questions are welcome.
Thank you for the presentation again. We'll start with feedback from the local committee.
Good morning again, Madam Chair, members of the board, Nate Law, Iowa City Incorporated. So this went through conceptual review last week at design review, and they were pretty supportive of the project, considering this was a candidate for demolition before. So they're happy to see it being saved and restored, as well as the addition. They believe holds the standard for new construction in the historic district. There were a few comments that they made that they would like to see when it comes back for final approval, such as the material palette is needed. They see that there's true divided light windows provided in the design. They just want to make sure that that's in the final design as well. There's the cornice detailing needed, as Greg mentioned, on the front of the gabled roof, a little bit more detail there. And there was talk about the return on the front pediment eave being a bit too narrow, as well as with the trim on the sides of the door, as Greg mentioned as well, being a bit too narrow. But overall, they're very supportive of this project, and they're excited to see it come back for final review. Thank you.
Thanks, Nate.
Thank you. We'll open up the floor to the commission for questions or comments. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad to see that somebody is saving this house. The commission did a site visit a couple of years ago. That front house was heavily fire damaged, but we really did not support demolition because it's integral to the fabric of that street. I noticed there are no current condition photos of the exterior. The current exterior has a front porch, which was put on quite a while ago. It's probably not original to the house, but I think we probably should have some discussion of the removal of that. But, you know, overall, I like the design. I'm glad to see somebody taking on this project.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Mr. Venezzi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I must give a quick anecdotal, which is that when I saw the elevation of a green square, I was like, oh, that feels like a mistake. And then I looked on Google and I was like, that is literally a perfect green square. So I think it's funny, but yeah, I'll echo exactly what Ms. Anderson said. Thank you for taking on the challenge of this house, right? You never want to see historic houses go away. And I think that your renovation and addition to it is extremely sensitive, especially you put it perfectly. It's not loud. It's not trying to be boisterous. You can just literally see it on the slit between the house and the current vegetation that's of the neighbors. It says, hi, I'm right here. I'm peeking out. And I think that was like super sensitive way to kind of address, you know, needing the addition to this house. And in terms of the proportions and detailing of the front facade, I do understand that Greek Revival architecture is extremely difficult. My roommate, who is also a historical architect, has countless time and days just getting the proportions just right. And I think obviously when you come back for final approval, things that I would personally like to see are like close-up details of we had this many projects back. I can't remember the exact one, but we were very adamant about seeing kind of the proportions of those details, because I think that is the crucial part in this type of architectural typology, is the devil's in those details, as Mies would say. So that's one thing I want to see. And number two, I'd probably want to see like a landscape plan and what you plan on doing the landscape. I can tell from Google Earth that there's heavy vegetation on the neighbor's side, and I just want to see how that affects, right, the reading of this new addition in the back. That'd be number two. I think the only other thing missing from this presentation that I really wanted to see, oh, I lost my spot, to see was the original conditions of the house, as Ms. Anderson put it. I think seeing how you're going to go from what's currently there to what you're proposing, and that translation will be crucial. But I think seeing those three things in the next phase of this project will really cement my personal approval and hopefully the rest of the commission's approval of this project. But once again, well done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Venezzi. Mr. Edmund?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Couple of things. So while in general, I love front porches, I'm looking at the Google Street View, and I think in this case that the removal of the front porch is a mercy for this building. And I really like your new front elevation. I actually like the pediment above the door. I'm sentimental, and I don't know if that's strictly historically appropriate for the precise age of this house, but it's also lovely the way it is. You mentioned that you need to come back with materials, and for me, the biggest question here is what that vertical panel system is and what the material quality of that is on the exterior.
We're looking at Aspire panels from Hardy for that, or something similar. So it would be a cement fiber board, but in a panel.
Okay. So as long as it's not a Luca bond or something like that.
No.
Thank you.
So I guess I will echo, I will keep it short since my fellow commission members said most of the things I wanted to. I think it's a very, appropriate intervention here, a very sensitive intervention of trying to keep the historical context or restore the historical context of the main house, but merge in with the alley's proportion of single height garages. So I think this is a very creative solution that you really aren't aware of what is in between, and you fit a lot in between that existing house and, you know, its entrance off the alley. So I think it's a very creative solution. Devil's in the details, as was said. I look forward to seeing, you know, more information on the exterior materiality and the landscaping, because obviously that's a huge part of this too. But I think it's a very wonderful proposal.
Thank you so much.
If I could just note one detail really quickly. This view is a bit deceiving because it's not showing the existing structure to the left side. So it is vacant. I mean, it's a void up to a certain depth in the lot. And it is grass currently, but it's not, you know, a soccer field as it kind of seems right now.
Sure. No, I think that's truly sells it, and or on Google Earth, you know, your images, you know, maybe just grain in that building so we can see into that courtyard, but you're never really ever going to see that view as you was mentioned. That's why I think it's very creative how much you fit onto this lot.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the commission? Does the applicant feel that they've received sufficient feedback on the proposal that you can continue to design and return to us, you know, with your final certificate of appropriateness?
Yes, this is great. This has been great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We look forward to seeing you come back.
Us too. Thanks.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for your time.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll move on to our final conceptual plan located at 4612 Clinton Avenue, the Wells resident, new construction of a single family house.
Good morning, everybody. Chris Rude, lead designer for the design assist on this project. We presented to Ohio City last week and got some very positive feedback. So I will just quickly run you through the project. Next slide. The project is located at 4612 Clinton Avenue. It is currently zoned 2 family, area district B, height district 1. Our maximum roof height would be 35. What we are currently proposing has a roof height of 27 feet. That may increase based off of feedback from Ohio City. Next slide. Photos of the existing conditions. This is a vacant lot with proposed new construction. And there is also new construction happening to the neighboring lot to the east that you can see. That has a 3-story construction going on there. We have an existing building to the west. Next slide. This is a view from the north property line looking south towards Clinton. And again, shows the rear access of the house that's being constructed to the east and the existing house. Next slide. This shows some neighborhood context. There's a variety of styles and construction types within the neighborhood. Next slide. So this is our site plan, and essentially we have two-story residential proposed at approximately 2,900 square feet. There would be a two-story breezeway that connects to a garage that would have a second-story guest suite / in-law suite that would happen above it. So we have essentially our total conditioned space would be about 3,457 square feet, and then 517 feet for the garage. We are trying to maintain massing that is appropriate, and also frontage that matches up with the neighboring properties. And again, access to the garage would happen off of Wheat Court, along with associated parking. Next slide. Essentially, basement floor plan. It would essentially be a combination of some finished space with a guest bedroom. We would have window wells with egress provided, and then unfinished with mechanical. Next slide. You can see here on the first floor, a bit non-traditional is the entry sequence, especially off the front porch. One of the initial recommendations we received from the block club was to increase the size of the front porch to make it more usable. Now, this particular design has access from the side, which is not traditional for the neighborhood. Normally, you would have front access, obviously, into the front facade. So you have the entry sequence, and then you can see the combination of the main house, the breezeway connection, and the garage. Next slide. And then second floor, essentially the biggest thing here is the guest / in-law suite that would happen above the garage. One of the questions that the block club brought up was whether or not that would be used as like an Airbnb or something else. And it would essentially be utilized by the owners essentially as an in-law suite. Next slide. This shows the south elevation that faces Clinton and the east elevation. We received a lot of positive feedback from Ohio City Review last week in terms of what we do with this front facade in particular. One of the things you'll notice is that there's the double high windows that happen here. You have the main windows, and you have essentially what is a third window type that happens either at the bathroom or the transition space into the living room. Some of the feedback we received would be to attempt to normalize the mullion patterns that happen across these. There's a lot going on the front, obviously. So some of the feedback we received was to attempt to, number one, get the window mullion patterns more consistent across the front facade. And the other feedback we received was in terms of the roof pitch. We're currently at a 27-foot roof pitch. It was recommended that maybe we look at going to something higher than that to match the adjacent houses. Now, when you look at the east elevation, there's a grade transition that happens from the front to the back. You can see the front porch here. And essentially, what we are doing is maximizing the east portion of the site. And then you can also see that we have an exterior fireplace, and then we have exterior stairs that go up to that second floor guest suite that happens up above the garage. Next slide. And then from here, you can see that we are proposing a privacy fence that happens along the west portion of the site. And then if you look at the north elevation that essentially goes onto Wheat Court, we have the garage door and then windows for the guest suite. Some of our initial feedback from Block Club had to do with normalizing the roof peak, which we updated accordingly. Introduction of the privacy fence, and also location of site relative to the neighboring buildings. So one of the things we'll do when we come back is, especially on the south elevation, is show what our massing looks like relative to the neighboring properties. just to show that we're trying to keep it appropriate relative to those neighboring properties. As far as materiality, another comment we got, we're using a combination of the gray brick, a precast stone at the base, the front entry accent portion would feature a wood cedar fiber cement panel. And then along the west facade, we would be using a gray fiber cement paneled siding. Another item of feedback we received from Ohio City was, in terms of the gray fiber cement paneled siding, to not use an integral wood grain within that, but to use something that's actually smooth. Next slide. So this shows the front elevation, and one of the things we will update with this as well is the context with the existing neighboring house in terms of location relative to that house and how far out that privacy fence actually comes. The other suggestion we received from Ohio City is to actually move the entire site plan off of that west edge to give a little bit more relief. And then it was also suggested that we potentially introduce a second privacy fence that happens along the east to the new construction that's currently happening. Next slide. This is just to give some size context of what we're proposing relative to what is happening new construction wise, height wise, adjacent. Next slide. This shows towards the back. Another suggestion we received from Ohio City was to show some additional detailing for the exterior fireplace that would happen. But this shows the transition from the house itself to the breezeway to the actual garage itself. Next slide. And then this shows essentially what the rear view of the house would be, with the garage entry, the guest suite, and how that transitions with the exterior stair that comes up and the main portion of the building.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. We'll start off with feedback from the local committee.
Good morning again, Madam Chair, members of the board. Last time I'll be saying that today, I think. Nate Law, Ohio City Incorporated. This was seen last week for conceptual review at our design review meeting. And Chris summarized a lot of the feedback that was given already, but I will just run through the list real quick. The committee wanted them to rethink the gray brick color and also suggested that maybe there's too much brick on this house. They suggested the pitch of the gable roof is too shallow. The 5 different window types, I believe there are, they said there was a need for simplification of those window types. And a big point was that the front door should be facing the street. I know that the owner has said that this wasn't preferred, but they felt that that was definitely would be a better design. They appreciate that they agreed to remove a non-used curb cut on the property, so that's a positive. Chris stated that there was the mullion placement and needed a little bit more consistency with the overall design. The railing on the front is a little bit too thin, they thought. They think bulking that up a little bit could look a lot better. They also suggested adding lintel stone across the top of the windows on the front. And also centering the home itself on the property to avoid the need for a variance from BZA. And the fireplace needing a little bit more detail and context. And as Chris said, the wood grain pattern being a smoother pattern instead. So that's all the feedback from design review. And thank you.
All right, thank you for that feedback. We'll open the floor up for commission's questions or comments. Who would like to start us off? All right, I will begin, and then other members can add on. I would echo much of what the local committee said. in this case, I wonder if all of the brick is required. I think on the front elevation, I prefer more or less, and to answer that, the mix on the front elevation, the brick and the clapboard on the entry piece, or is that horizontal siding? I'm sorry, vertical siding.
The front entry piece would actually be a Nishiha that would run horizontal, yes.
Okay, so horizontal, I wonder if there's a little bit too much brick there. I think you might be able to simplify that. And then would it also allow you to integrate the railing a little bit more? The little area in front of the window, to me, like it's somewhere in between. Feels like you may want the porch to be, previously if it was smaller or bigger. Right now it just doesn't, the porch doesn't engage with the house for me enough. It feels just sort of tacked on the front. So I think integrating the design of the porch more would be helpful to the design. Centering it, obviously on the property would make sense if it allows you to not have to pursue variances. Overall, I think the organization of the site and the design is nice, and how you've incorporated a courtyard in the middle is nice. And but I think the refinement of the window configurations and/or locations is still, I would encourage you to continue doing that. The last thing on the front elevation, I couldn't quite tell if those central windows that you mentioned are in the bathrooms, I believe, are centered under the gable or slightly off center from the gable. The flat elevation made it appear a little bit like they were not centered, so I couldn't tell. Those little rectangular ones.
Carl, if you could go back a few slides to the actual orthogonal elevation. There we go. Yeah, they're slightly off center. Yes. So we could center those up. That's based off the floor plan, but we can certainly adjust the dimensions on those. Yes.
Yeah, I think massaging that so that it has that uniform symmetry, although interpreted differently in this design, helps it fit into the context of the neighborhood better. It has that familiarity, although it's interpreted different, materials or organization. It's is always something that I encourage people to do.
Okay.
And yeah, I think overall, just continuing to refine the details will make this a very strong project.
And one other detail that was mentioned also that you can see from this front elevation and actually from the east elevation as well. From a proportion standpoint, especially if you look at some of the other houses and some of the previous projects we had looked at, would be to increase the profile of the rake on the roof itself. Because it given the proportion of the building overall, one of the things we're going to look at is increasing that rake to make it a little bit more appropriate and more traditional in terms of the existing structures and some of the proposed. Yeah.
I would agree with that. Right now, it feels a little stout. It seems looking on the streets that many of them have a 12-12 or something fairly close to that. I think something closer to a 12-12 may be appropriate here, so that it gives you that anchoring into the neighborhood with the adjacent houses.
Yep.
But that's overall, I think it's a creative solution to a tight site. Mr. Bonezzi, questions or comments from you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be short since you got to a lot of them, and I'll just reinforce and echo. One was the rake of the roof, because I think you'll get closer to that icon, house shape that people kind of come to associate with houses. The second was the brick issue. I think the design review is concerned about denoting the entry to the house, and I think a way that you could solve two issues with one simple move is try studying the flip-flopping what is brick and what is siding, because I think brick is a material that we commonly associate, it's a more substantial material. So you can use the material identity to kind of denote that, this volume here is the entry. that might help you in a way kind of achieve the less utilitarian look of what large swaths of brick can do, and kind of using it selectively at the entryway can kind of solve two birds with one stone. And then my last comment was those windows on the front elevation, but the chair already addressed those. So overall, I think the plan of the building is very well laid out. All of the design reviews comments I would support entirely. I think they hit a lot of the things that I would also kind of bring up. Because I think when you start studying moving that brick around, the two cast stone kind of bands that go all the way around the building, you won't really have to, you can readdress what those are. Because I think right now it really segments your facade into like, it's piecing up that piece that wants to feel more monolithic in that sense as it goes around the side. So you get the house shape. In terms of moving the door, I'm not torn, on a traditional house, we want to see the door facing the front. I think because you are reinterpreting the typology of a traditional house, it's to be said of, as the next iteration comes back, whether that needs to be a bigger issue. But for now, that is all I have. So thank you for the project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bernazzi.
Thank you, Madam
Other
Chair.
questions? Other questions or comments from the commission? Here, Mr. Strickland had to leave us, and he usually has comments, but other questions or comments from the commission? Not seeing any at this time. Does the applicant feel you've received sufficient feedback from the commission that you can continue the development of your design to then come back for your certificate of appropriateness?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you. We look forward to seeing you in the future. That concludes our concept plan reviews. We will now move on to National Register of Historic Places nominations. Oh,
Madam Chair.
I jumped over one. Sorry, I apologize about that. We'll move on to our final concept plan review of the Fidelity Home, a hotel located at 1940 East 6th Street. Look at the screen and not the agenda. Sorry.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present this. I am Paul Alessandro with Hartzman Plunkett Architecture. We're here today to give you an introduction to our project on the Fidelity building on East 6th, walk through some of the items that we are altering on the building, and get your feedback. We have previously met with the Downtown Flats Design Review Committee and have comments from them. We are scheduled to have a call with Justin Cook from SHPO this afternoon. So we're in the process of collecting everybody's comments and expect to come back to address anything that we have previously from those reviews and then from today's review. What you're looking at is the site plan. There isn't a significant amount of alteration we're proposing here. Obviously, we do have some accessibility issues with the slope on the sidewalk and the steps of the building. Actually, can I just back up for 1 second? How familiar is everyone with the building? How much background about how the building works do I need to go into?
Needed a high level review would be helpful just to make
Okay.
sure that we all have a general understanding.
Right. I just didn't want to repeat stuff that people knew here. So the building as it currently exists, it's on East 6th. East 6th has quite a elevation difference from north to south here. And the building itself on the first floor steps with those elevation changes. There is about a 16-inch step every other bay in the building as it steps down. And then the second floor obviously is flat. We are proposing to restore the storefront, bring it back to more of its original character, reuse the historic entry under the pediment, and then also have a second entrance to a small outpost storefront at the north end of the site. We are also proposing an addition on the back, which you can see on this plan that is off the alley between column lines E and C. That small addition stays on our property, but will contain part of the kitchen that serves the first floor restaurant and bar. Also, I did not mention that this is being turned into a small hotel. So the first floor will be taken up with the lobby, the entry, and a hotel, bar, and restaurant. We're currently working with the Downtown Cleveland Alliance. We were approached by them that there is a kind of planned redo of the streetscape, and we're going to sit down with them and get some of their input as well as we start to develop this further. Next slide. Just kind of context plans. Obviously, this building backs up to the arcade. The parking garage, I guess, that's adjacent to the arcade. Some context pictures looking through the alley at the top there. And then the center is the current condition of the front building with the non-historic storefront added in. And then we also have some historic information that we actually received from Mr. Pettit on historic photographs, as well as historic elevations that we're using as our basis of design for restoring the street front facade. Next slide, please. We'll go through the plans here. So the basement is dedicated mostly to back of house. All of our mechanical and incoming service rooms are on the sidewalk on East 6th, where we have some guest bathrooms serving the first floor F&B component, and then our staff locker rooms and a prep kitchen down here. We are adding a service elevator in the back in the location of the chimney breach as it exists now. We are keeping the chimney and we'll be re-supporting it, but we're using that space in the building to service our restaurant and back of house uses. Next slide, please. You can see on the first floor, we're entering the building on the south end here, and our reception is across from the elevator lobbies. And then the rest of the first floor is dedicated to first the bar off the lobby, and then the restaurant, and then there's a small private dining room, which is shown in that gray area. And then the last piece on the north there is a small coffee shop that'll be accessed off the street. And again, you can see here the first floor addition of the kitchen that is bumped out in the back. That's also shaded in gray, as well as our elevator coming up. Our service is off the alley. Everything coming in will be coming in off the alley, and then our trash storage will be in the rear alley. Next slide, please. There's a mezzanine level. The mezzanine level will contain a small bar across the back, and then we're doing double height spaces for all of our F&B spaces, the bar and the restaurant off the front to maintain that full height of the lobby as we go down the storefront. Next slide. This is our second floor. The second floor is, I'll put it in quotes, the ballroom floor. This is a small building, and obviously the columns are there. So this will be meetings, small gatherings, weddings. This also contains our hotel office, another service kitchen, and guest restrooms. Next slide. All right, and then this slide is our typical 3 through 8th floor. This shows you also the second addition that we're making to the back of the building. If you look between, sorry here. So between column line, well, between the south stair and column line B, we are bumping the rear elevation of the building out on floors 3 through 8, contain that bump out between the chimney and that stair to give ourselves a little more room in the floor plate so we can get guest rooms on both sides of a central corridor. And we'll take a look at that in elevation when we get there. But then this is the typical guest room layout. The third floor also contains the gym space for the hotel, but then it turns into guest rooms above. The next slide. So this is really our typical 4 through 8 guest room floor plan. And then on 9, the building steps back into its original facade location in the rear. And then this continues for 9 and 10 and 11. And next slide. This is the storefront. Okay, is it possible to blow up that storefront a little bit?
Unfortunately, it is not, but
It is not.
okay.
Okay.
They have
That's
the
okay.
ability to do that on their own screens.
Great, thank you. So this is what was presented originally to the Flats committee. They gave us some comments about simplifying it, which we are in the process of doing, bringing it more in line with the original facade, equal division, 3 equal divisions rather than the center panel side light division. And then we are also relocating that entry door from the second bay to the first bay inside the pedimented entry. But the idea of the stepping storefront with the sign band is being retained, and that is very similar to what existed historically. Next slide, please. It's just a side elevation showing that we are infilling some of the windows on the side elevation. Those will be infilled with brick and then recessed back from the face of the building to maintain the memory of that window opening. Next slide, please. And then this is the rear elevation. So you can see the 2 additions we're proposing, one at grade, that approximate 4-foot bump out that holds the kitchen cooking line. And then the elevation there shaded in gray, which is the bump out on floors 3 through 8. And again, just maintaining the same rhythm of windows and a masonry facade at that location. Little 3D image of what we're proposing. The top left shows how that bump out works in relationship to the chimney and the stair, that it is sandwiched in between. And then a couple more images of the sidewalk and then the building from the front. This is just a little diagrammatic section showing, you can see the bump out for the kitchen, the bump out for the residential floors, and then the location of the building relative to grade in the basement. This illustrates how that first floor steps as we go south to north. And then there is a internal ramp in the lobby that accommodates those steps for accessibility. And right now, that's the end of the presentation. Again, this is a very preliminary conceptual review, just to make sure that we're not doing anything that is going to cause pushback or any kind of additional negative comments. So with that, we'll take any questions you have.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll begin with feedback from the local design review committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This was reviewed by the Downtown Flats Design Review Committee on January 20th, and they reviewed it schematically. They approved it with a few conditions, including providing a site plan of the interior layout of the building, considering equitable access to the building. They require a lighting plan for final approval, and they also there was also a condition about the pickup and drop off situation that needs to be solved for final approval as well. But otherwise, they approved it as presented.
And then just to add on to that, the pickup and drop off is something we are working with the Downtown Cleveland Alliance on.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that feedback from the committee. We'll open the floor then for the commission for questions and comments. Questions and comments from the commission? Who'd like to start us off? Mr. Edwin?
Just quickly, I think that moving the entrance to the architectural entrance in the last bay is a really good move. So I certainly support that. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pettit?
I just had some questions about the proposed scope of work to the front facade. Are you doing any, is there any restoration of the stonework required? And are you replacing all of the windows on that facade?
We are not replacing the windows. The windows are currently replacement windows. We are in the process of doing a window survey to see which of those windows need to be repaired and are replaced individually, but we're not doing a wholesale replacement. The building, we have an exterior facade consultant who has done an evaluation of the building, and we will be repairing any loose or damaged limestone pieces, and then doing a full clean and tuck point of the facade.
Thank you. And just one last question: Are you treating that party wall condition on the south side of the building that's been kind of an issue for years?
Yes, we are. I don't have an exact way that we're treating it now. We're in the middle of kind of taking it apart, investigating what's going there, but we will be cleaning that up and sealing the side of the building there.
And I guess my only other comment is, and I realize you're still working with SHPO on final approvals for your tax credits. I do think that the configuration of the storefronts is really key to this building. It's given the way that you experience this building and some of the unfortunate alterations to those storefronts over the years, I think I would just encourage you to look at the storefronts and just make sure that whatever you come up with is respectful of the overall character of the building.
And that has been a consistent comment. So we are, as I indicated, we're headed more towards the original configuration, the storefront.
Okay. Thank you. For those questions, Mr. Bornesi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep it short and sweet because we're getting late in the day, but it was a very clean and concise conceptual presentation of the building. I think you are more than aware of all of the intricacies that go into kind of a building of this scale and size and how to deal with it. And the only comment, Don, that I had with Don already got, which was details about what those storefront systems are going to be. I live about a block away from this building, so the only true way to experience this building is those storefronts because of the narrowness of that street. But otherwise, I think this is headed in a very positive direction. So thank you.
My only addition or questions in addition to what others have asked is, and I apologize if I stated it and I missed it, what's the materiality of your additions in the rear?
The addition on the upper floors, so 3 through 8, will be masonry of some sort. We're not 100% clear yet whether it'll be full-size brick or some kind of a thin brick applied over a metal stud exterior. It's all about the weight because we're kind of cantilevering that addition off of the columns, but it will have a brick appearance to it. The bump out at the first floor will have some sort of composite panel exterior. We'll be putting some bollards there to protect it from getting hit, but it'll be a cement board of some type for there.
And your windows, will they match the existing window materiality?
They will. The existing windows are non-historic replacements, so they will be double hung aluminum frame windows.
I think those are my main comments, is just when you return, bring your materials so that we can understand those, and the color elevation would be helpful. I think we've already spoke about the storefronts, just so that we can try to right some wrongs in this building, right? As you look at it in Google Earth, there's a hodgepodge of different storefronts, but the uniqueness of how you experience the storefronts on this building, just providing that uniformity will really make this building shine.
Agreed. Thank you.
Do we have other questions or comments from the commission? Mr. Brundage?
Not, thank you, Madam Chair. Not building related, but I know you mentioned there's going to be some streetscape being done. I just want to point out that I know that at this curb portion here, I believe there's an ADA issue that is too raised for a wheelchair to get over comfortably. If you could just make a note as you're working with downtown Cleveland Alliance, that would be a great improvement in that area.
Yeah. It's consistent across the facade, unfortunately, because the sidewalk grade and the building grade don't line up. So our civil engineer is currently working on writing a lot of that grade issue.
Are there other questions or comments from the commission? Does the applicant feel like you've received sufficient feedback from the commission to continue and complete your design?
I do. We expect to consolidate your comments along with the other comments we've gotten, plus SHPO's, and then return for a more thorough review.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to seeing you in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now that concludes our concept plan review, and we will move on to our National Register of Historic Places nominations. Mr. Brundage and Mr. Pettit, could you please take us through this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll do this very briefly. I know all of you received the nominations as well as the supporting materials, so I won't go into too much detail. In our role as a certified local government, we are given the opportunity to comment on National Register nominations by the State Preservation Office. These are the first 3 of 6 that will be reviewed by the State Preservation Board on March 18th. And I'll just run through them very quickly. The first one is the Euclid Avenue Historic District expansion. It's really an update of the existing district and its boundaries. It includes adding a block between East 18th Street and East 22nd Street on Prospect Avenue that's directly related to the Euclid Avenue. It includes buildings that are contributing that were somehow overlooked in the original nomination, like the Hermit Club on the screen. This is the block on Prospect between 18th and 22nd, which is being added for their association and also for their architecture. The period of significance has been updated to 1971, so there are a lot of buildings that are now contributing to the district that have been added, including the Marcel Breuer Tower, the clock in front of the old Cleveland Trust building, and I believe this is the, I forget what this is called, but this is now considered a contributing building in the National Register District. So it's really cleaning up the old nomination. This is the old parking garage for Bailey's, which is at the corner of Prospect and Ontario Street. So I think all of those, I think those are great additions to the nomination, and will make a lot more buildings eligible for historic tax credits for potential projects. I can go through these all at once that's your pleasure. The second nomination is the Monmouth Building, which was built in 1915. It's a commercial block apartment building at the corner of East 116th and Euclid. It's being nominated for its architecture. It was designed by the firm of Steffens and Steffens, who were notable for their apartment building designs throughout the city. And in this case, for its neoclassical white terracotta facade. It's being nominated again for architecture under Criterion C, and we think it's clearly eligible for the National Register. The third one is Nathaniel Hawthorne School on West 130th Street. This is one of several buildings that have currently gone through an RFP process with the City of Cleveland and the Cleveland Metropolitan School District for potential adaptive reuse. There are currently 4 proposed for the National Register, and all of these involve adaptive reuse to housing. These are some of the last surviving historic schools in the system. And that are also landmarked. So we're thrilled that there's finally scrutiny and an opportunity here to reuse these buildings. Nathaniel Hawthorne was built by the Village of West Park. It has neoclassical elements, but it's really being nominated for its representation of the evolution of school buildings in the early 20th century, reflecting progressive era reforms for both safety and improved technology in school buildings. So staff supports all 3 of these, and I guess at the pleasure of the commission, we would entertain motions to support these, recommend support of these to the Preservation Advisory Board in March. For the National Register of Historic Places.
These are all 3 wonderful buildings. I love that the Hermit Club is finally included because it's such a special little gem that you don't even know that's there. I'll open the floor to questions and comments from the commission. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had an opportunity to tour the Monmouth Building a few years ago, and it is really a jewel. It's there's a lot of original features that are intact inside and out. Unfortunately, at least when I toured it, it was in poor condition, and there was some sloping floors and that kind of thing. But I definitely want to see it saved and hopefully renovated soon. It's the units were kind of charming. They were small, but they were just all the original woodwork was there. It was a fascinating place. So hopefully it'll come back to life very soon. Glad to see it's being nominated. And as far as the Nathaniel Hawthorne School, I was just driving past it a few weeks ago. I was wondering excuse the dogs, what was going on with that. I'm glad to see that there's an RFP. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Mr. Bornazzi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Considering that 90% of these are in my neighborhood, I am more than ecstatic. Excited to always see more buildings of various typologies added to the register that allows them to always be protected. So more than happy for the support as always.
Excellent. Thank you for that feedback. Additional questions or comments? Or would someone like to make a motion? Ms. Anderson?
One more quick comment, and I will move that we approve these. I really enjoy reading Michael Cleaner's reports and his investigation on these buildings. It's fascinating. He does a great job of getting into the history of them. And I do move that we approve these for nomination.
And I'm just going to check, do we have the wording verbiage correctly? Is it a motion to a recommendation to continue the nomination?
Motion to continue the nomination.
I think that's
Support the nomination for addition to the National Register of Historic Places.
that works for me.
Works for me too.
You broke up a little bit on my side, so so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a second, a dual second. Any further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonazzi,
Yes.
Mr. Colicchio. Sorry, I'm not sure who's still here. Mr. Dreyer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmond,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasik,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move on to administrative reports.
I don't really have a report today. I want to thank you all for getting us through a very long agenda in a very reasonable amount of time. We are meeting our new Director of City Planning on Monday, so I'm looking forward to that and working with her. She will be joining us at our next Landmarks Commission meeting, I assume. But unless you have questions, I have nothing else today. Carl has scheduled a site visit for the next week, and I'll let him comment on that.
Thank you. 1 p.m. on Tuesday on Garden Avenue. This is for the demolition of the house and for the parking for the lofts on Earl project that we approved. Was it last month? So, yeah, 1 o'clock. Hopefully, we'll see you all there. If not, I'll take plenty of pictures.
Unfortunately, I have a conflict and will not be able to join. Hopefully, at least one commission member can join. Right? Anything else?
And I'm being there.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Anything else from the commission? All right, then we are adjourned for today's meeting. We'll see everyone in 2 weeks. Have a great day.
You too.
Everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.